I'd like to call the Charter Township of Chesterfield regular board meeting to order for January 11th, 2022 at 7 p.m. All stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Clerk Berry, would you call the roll?
Supervisor Kersten.
Aye. Here.
Treasurer Elliott.
Here.
Trustee Anderson.
Here.
Trustee Joseph.
Here.
Trustee DeMink. Clerk Berry is here. Trustee Vosburg is absent. I'd like to ask for a motion to excuse Trustee Vosburg from tonight's meeting.
I'll support that motion, and Trustee Vosburg did advise me that she would be out of town and would not be able to attend this meeting, so I would ask that it be excused.
And maybe we take a vote on that, Mr. Supervisor.
Clerk Berry, call the roll.
Clerk Berry, aye. Supervisor Kersten.
Aye.
Trustee Anderson.
Aye.
Trustee Joseph. Aye. Trustee DeMink.
Aye.
Treasurer Elliott. Aye.
Approval of agenda. Clerk Berry.
4A is the approval of the agenda with addendum if necessary.
A motion to approve the agenda.
Mr. Supervisor, I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
Support.
Motion by Clerk Berry, supported by Treasurer Elliott, to approve the agenda as stated. Clerk Berry, call the roll.
Clerk Berry, aye. Treasurer Elliott.
Aye.
Trustee Anderson.
Aye.
Trustee Joseph. Aye. Trustee DeMink.
Aye.
Supervisor Kersten.
Aye. Item 5, presentations.
Item 5 is a presentation by the Police Department to present a new patrol officer, Danielle Feld, for the oath of office.
Captain Franks, Captain McNair.
So, Ms. Feld comes from us from St. Clair County and Macomb County, growing up in both counties. She has a bachelor's degree from Oakland University in criminal justice. It should be noticed she comes from a long legacy of police work. Her grandpa retired out of city Detroit after several years. Her father, Sergeant Feld, works for Chesterfield currently for the last 23 years, and she has an uncle that also retired out of Detroit Police. So we're getting a legacy to join the Chesterfield Township Police Department. We welcome her.
What do you?
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of this state,
and the Constitution of this state,
and that I will faithfully perform the duties
and I will faithfully perform the duties
of the office of police officer
of the office of police officer
in and for the Township of Chesterfield,
in and for the Township of Chesterfield,
County of Macomb,
County of Macomb,
State of Michigan,
State of Michigan,
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. You want to sign the oath book for me?
Item 6, department reports. Trustee DeMink.
This is from Leisure Services. The Macomb County Senior Dining Program has set up shop at Chesterfield Senior Center. Join them on most days for a delicious, nutritious meal. No reservations are needed, but meal counts are limited. Doors open at 11 a.m. Stay and socialize with friends or pack your meal to go. Lunch is served at 11:30 a.m. Suggested $3 donation feeds our 60 and older friends. Visit Leisure Services website at parks.chesterfieldtownship.org or our Facebook page for the monthly meal menus. Next, the Daddy-Daughter Dance comes once a year, creating a special memories for all who attend. Grab your suits, cowboy hats, and dancing shoes for an afternoon with your special little lady. This year's dance takes place on Sunday, February 27th from 4 to 8 p.m. at Zucaro's Banquet Hall. Registration accepted in person or online through Leisure Services website, or call 949-0400 extension 4 for further details. Space is limited and fills fast. Purchase your tickets today to avoid being on the wait list. Thank you, Mr. Supervisor.
Thank you. Trustee Joseph.
Just a quick update on the Selfridge sustainability study. As I reported to the board at the last meeting, the sustainability study period closed out in December. We had our final meeting. There was some concerns that were expressed and a request for a additional follow-up with the county. I had that meeting yesterday. The developer who is responsible for the town center property was part of that meeting, and we had a pretty productive discussion about possibility for some additional grant money that may be something the township can access. And there's a defense contractors meeting in March that I would plan to talk more to the board about, and our relationship with some potential federal dollars as a result of the sustainability study. So more details when I get them, but the concerns about our ability to develop the south end of our township were well received by the county, and I think there's some attention to helping us and to make sure that we are not compromised with any expansion of the base. And so I was really grateful to have the support of the county's economic development coordinator who chaired this meeting, and her assurance that one, not only is she aware of potential difficulties with respect to the base expansion, but also the need to get more information to our township. And I was really appreciative to hear that she's interested in helping facilitate a town hall meeting where we can get some base officials, particularly those responsible for the environmental impacts, to come to Chesterfield soon to talk with our residents about concerns involving environment, expansion, and so forth. So just a brief update on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Joseph. Clerk Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. One report from Clerk's Department and one from the Elections Department. The Clerk's Department held their first late-night passport just recently. I'd like to report to the board that it appears that after seeing a reduction in passport processing and revenue from the pandemic and the effects of COVID-19 in 2020 and 2021, it looks like 2022 is back on track, and it looks like we are going to be coming back to numbers that we saw pre-pandemic. That is good news from a revenue standpoint, but also from a service delivery perspective, and we are very pleased with what we see so far. I would like to remind the board as well as the public that the Chesterfield Township Clerk's Office will have periodic events throughout the year that will allow for passport processing outside of regular business hours. This will help to accommodate families and others, applicants who aren't able to come to the township during regular business hours. We may actually even be expanding that to accommodate demand if we see that that is the case, so we are prepared for that. From the Elections Department, would just like to give a reminder that the Know Your Vote initiative is still open and available, and that will remain so indefinitely. That is a program by which any resident, registered voter here in Chesterfield who is concerned that their voting history is not accurately represented may request a copy of their personal voting history online through the clerk's office, and that will be submitted to them or given to them via email, via any other type of electronic mechanism, as well as in person in the clerk's office, or we may mail a copy to them. That is available to any registered voter here in Chesterfield Township. Just go to the clerk's page on the website and you can make that request to ensure that your voting history is accurate. If there is an inaccuracy found, please notify the clerk's office immediately, and we will investigate the matter and remedy this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Clerk Berry. Just a couple updates from the Supervisor's Office. First, we had our first meeting with Anchor Bay Schools in regards to the shared use of one of the local schools here in the township. That was a very positive meeting. Our partners that we're meeting with in these meetings is obviously Anchor Bay Schools, our Chesterfield Library Board, and portions of that. Also the City of New Baltimore, and the meetings were the initial kickoff. They were very progressive. We have another meeting scheduled, and there will be several coming forward. So that's just an update of what the previous request that I had made back in November of this year. Also, in your township emails, you'll receive, there's been some expansion on the use options for the ARPA funds, which were dedicated to the township. We've looked at them, we're beginning to study them, what those rules and what those uses are for them, and the expansion it opens up a few more doors for the township as to where we can use those funds. So we're studying it, we're taking a look at it, and we'll get that information to the board here in the coming days, if not the coming weeks. And then the last discussion or point, I had a brief meeting with the REPI group from Selfridge and along with Six Rivers. And this was to further a discussion that was originally presented apparently over 4 years ago. And I also forwarded that request on to each of you. That appears to be something that we'll schedule for a presentation in front of the board, what right now appears to be the end of February. So you'll have some input and some discussion on that piece. And that's all I have from the Supervisor's Office. Kevin from DPW, Kevin Johnson, please.
Yes, good evening. Just to give you guys an update, the last meter order we did back in December, there was a 5-week lead time on meters. As of January 1, that has been pushed to a 12-week lead time on meters. So we're going through our inventory process, looking at all of our accounts, and going to be presenting to the board another order in the near future here, just to make sure we stay on top of the inventory we need for the spring and summer months coming forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Johnson. Any further department reports? Seeing none, I'll bring it back up to the board. Item 7, consent agenda. Clerk Berry.
All items under the consent agenda are considered routine by the board and will be enacted in one motion. There is no separate discussion of these items. If discussion of any item is required by a board member, it will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. Public comments on the consent agenda items are permitted. 7A, approval of the minutes of the regular board meeting of December 21st, 2021. Approval of the payment of bills as submitted by the Finance Department. C, to set a public hearing on Tuesday, February 8th, 2022, to hear comments concerning the allocation of the 2022 Community Development Block Grant as required by the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974 as amended. Approve a recommendation by the Human Resources Department to opt out of Public Act 152 for the 2022 calendar year and adopt resolution number 2022-01. Adopt proclamation number 2022-01 honoring Deputy Treasurer Ellen Clark for her years of service to Chesterfield Township.
Thank you. I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as read.
Support.
Point of order, Mr. Supervisor.
Point of order.
Or a point of discussion on this, and that is that to set a public hearing as well as item C and item D, I would ask the maker of the motion to remove those items and consider them separately as roll calls are required.
I will amend the motion to remove items C and D from the consent agenda for separate discussion. They will become item 9A and B.
Continued
correct?
support.
Continued support by Treasurer Elliott. Further discussion from the board? No further discussion from the board? Comments from the public?
John Spica, 53978 Connor Drive. Just a couple questions. One of them is dealing with the sewer and water fund. 591-441-801.000. We've got on there, we've got a study from the DPW that was done by Plant Moran in the amount of $10,700. So I'm just curious, it's a study that the residents paid. I don't see it on the website at all. So if we can, I'd like to see what the results of that study was from DPW. If we could post that, I would appreciate it. And then the other thing that I noticed on there was 591-441-931.000 in the amount of $4,900. I noticed that we're doing some renovating at the DPW. So just curious, we've got a conference room right now at the DPW, so I'm wondering why we are building another conference room, and not only are we building another conference room, why is it a silent-proof conference room? I don't see any purpose for something like that in the township. And then one last thing regarding the consent agenda is in regards to the Deputy Treasurer, Miss Ellen Clerk, leaving. Mr. LaFata put something in the Bay Voice that I think everybody should hear and know about. He said, before the start of the December 14th, 2021 Chesterfield Township Board meeting, Ellen Clark came over to tell me that her last day was December 28th. I thought she was going to break out in tears. Ellen started as an employee at the township out of high school, some 40-plus years, and was a dedicated employee. Over Ellen's 4 decades plus of employment, worked in just about every department and position in the office complex. If you needed help or had a problem, Ellen was the go-to person, first in the office in the morning and always willing to help. I am proud to say Ellen was my deputy treasurer and investment coordinator. There was no way that I could possibly thank her enough for her help. She is an amazing woman, also manages the IT department, alarm, phone system, plus other assumed responsibility. Ellen will be replaced with multiple people in multiple departments. Chesterfield's new efficient operating model. Webster Dictionary, irreplaceable, something or someone that cannot be replaced. Unreplaceable, impossible to replace. A hard choice of words and an analogy. They have tried to find a new person to play the role of Wonder Woman. I still think Linda Carter will always be irreplaceable as Wonder Woman. The same applies to Ellen's present in Chesterfield Township offices. Ellen Clark is irreplaceable and unreplaceable.
Thank you,
Ellen,
sir.
thank you for
Time's
your
up.
years of service to the residents of Chesterfield.
Thank you. Bring it back up to the board. There's a motion by Supervisor Kersten, supported by Treasurer Elliott, to approve the consent agenda with the removal of items 9A and 9B. Correction, I'm sorry, consent item C and consent item D, which will be 9A and 9B on the regular agenda. Clerk Berry, call the roll.
Supervisor Kersten.
Aye.
Treasurer Elliott.
Aye.
Trustee Anderson.
Aye.
Trustee Joseph.
Aye.
Trustee Demink.
Aye.
Clerk Berry, aye.
Item 9A, you want considered separately, which would be item C from the consent agenda, is that correct?
That's correct.
Clerk Berry, please call.
Set a public hearing on Tuesday, February 8th, 2022, to hear comments concerning the allocation of 2022 Community Development Block Grant as required by the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974 as amended.
So moved.
Support?
Support.
I have a motion by Trustee Joseph, supported by Clerk Berry, to approve item, or consent item 9C. Discussion from the board?
The motion seemed pretty straightforward, and I know Clerk Berry had the issue, so I would ask her to expound on what she's interested in clarifying.
Clerk Berry.
My point was simply to clarify that this particular item will require a roll call vote and to be considered separately, just simply from a procedure standpoint. No issue with the content of the item.
Any further comments from the board? Comments from the public on consent item 9C, which is now item 9A. Seeing none, Clerk Berry, would you please call the roll?
Trustee Joseph. Aye. Clerk Berry, aye. Trustee Anderson.
Aye.
Trustee Demink.
Aye.
Treasurer Elliott.
Aye.
Supervisor Kersten.
Aye. Item 9B.
Approve a recommendation by the Human Resource Department to opt out of Public Act PA 152 for the 2022 calendar year and adopt resolution number 2022-01. Mr. Supervisor, I'd make a motion to approve the recommendation and adopt resolution number 2022-01.
Support.
Trustee Anderson, support? Trustee Anderson. Motion by Clerk Berry, supported by Trustee Anderson to approve item 9B. Comments from the board?
I don't know, if-
Trustee Joseph.
I'm sorry. I don't know if this is the same roll call procedural matter, but since we have removed it, it has never been an issue that's been on the consent agenda, and I think it's worth some explanation. And I know from years past, our HR director was able to, provide that. Now our deputy supervisor. So if we could just get a little background, overview on Public Act 152 and why we're opting out.
Absolutely. Director Duchesne?
Members of the board, the state law for public employers applies to the township via Public Act 152, which creates fundamentally a hard cap or a maximum amount that a public employer may contribute to medical health care plans for its employees or elected officials. Annually, the Treasury, State Treasurer does a determination under PA 152 pursuant to the formula contained in the Act, and the board has to take action to waive that applicability of under PA 152. The situation is with us is that with collective bargaining agreements, we have, by entering those agreements, in effect, have promised and entered into a labor contract that already sets what, if any, sharing would be with the employees and the township in healthcare costs. We are self-insured, and we have rates as put in the financial information in the backup, what our present costs are, and you are aware that the healthcare fund has been doing very well, but in the perspective of where we are matching the state hard cap amount, for example, single employees, the hard cap is set at $7,304. We are presently charging internally our $7,938. Therefore, the board has to make this action tonight, pass a resolution recognizing that.
Thank you, Deputy Duchesne. Trustee Joseph?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. So when you talk about a hard cap, I've understood that from past discussions to mean that the Act designates a specific amount that any municipality or school or any really that gets government funding can only spend X amount of dollars on a family health care plan or a single employee health care plan. You indicated that the single was $7,300 roughly. Do you know offhand what the family hard cap dollar amount is?
Yes, the family coverage is $22,000, the cap is $19,921.45. Our costs are $22,815.92.
So just to close this out, Public Act 152 must be voted on by the board every year, but in reality, if we don't have a contract year, we're already bound by the terms of the labor agreements. This is, in essence, this year would be a formality because we've already agreed to pay and compensate our employees' health care at the rates that you mentioned. But I would like to point out, I think it was our first term, maybe Clerk Berry and Trustee Anderson, we were advocates of not opting out because the health care that the township was paying was almost double in some instances what the hard cap was. Although we didn't opt out of Public Act 152, what we did do is rearrange and reconfigure our healthcare costs, and we are now near the hard cap just through internal review and some pretty savvy marketplace shopping, and the combination of self-insured and some of the other insurance products have really brought down our biggest expenditure, healthcare costs. We can now opt out of Public Act 152 and be very close to the hard cap, which is unheard of for a employment group as small as ours. I say small because when we go out into the marketplace to buy insurance products, and you have a company that has hundreds or thousands of employees, they can offset high dollar injuries and illnesses, you know, cancers and different things, in a way that we can't. And so our rates are typically higher. So it's I'm glad that it was pulled from the consent, because I think the residents need to hear how much and how far we've come as it relates to healthcare and Public Act 152. To be at 22,000 when it was just not very long ago, we were over $30,000, and healthcare costs have gone up since those days, and we're still very competitive and offer our employees a pretty good product, and we're close to the hard cap. So it was worth a little extra discussion for me, because this is a big issue for residents. This is their biggest expense when it comes to you know, cost of doing business, if you will. So great job to our team for the revisions that have been made in healthcare. Thank you, Mr. Supervisor.
Thank you. Comments from the public? No comments from the public. I'll bring it back to the board. I have a motion by Clerk Berry, supported by Trustee Anderson, to approve item 9, consent item 9B, the regular agenda. Clerk Berry.
Clerk Berry, aye. Trustee Anderson.
Aye.
Trustee Joseph.
Aye.
Trustee DeMink.
Aye.
Treasurer Elliott.
Aye.
Supervisor Kersten.
Aye. Item 8, public hearings. There are no scheduled public hearings tonight. We will move to the regular agenda. Item 9A.
9A is a recommendation by Supervisor Brad Kersten to approve the employment agreement between the Charter Township of Chesterfield. That was included in the consent agenda.
Okay. Apologies.
Yep. Continue, Clerk.
Thank you. Item 9A is a recommendation by Supervisor Brad Kersten to approve the employment agreement between the Charter Township of Chesterfield and Brian Bassett for the position of Director of Public Safety.
I'll make a motion to approve item 9A.
Support.
Support by Trustee DeMink. Director Duchesne, do you want to open this up and then I'll fill in, or?
My pleasure. Certainly introduced to the members of the public the candidate recommended by the supervisor as Public Safety Director, Brian Bassett, who will be entering an employment agreement that's at will to serve the township as the new Director of Public Safety following Supervisor Kersten. It is notable that the township has received numerous letters of recommendation from references and from non-references from federal, state, and colleagues that supported Brian in this application. I was pleased to work with our advisory group, the liaison committee that reviewed applications and participated in the interview process to reach a conclusion and a recommendation. Now, I'm very pleased to say that he has a master's from Central Michigan University. He also has a master's certificate from the University of Virginia, been a graduate of the FBI Academy and School of Staff and Command. But more importantly, I think the breadth and scope of his experience is unusually found in this area of police work, and has held positions in a large organization and agency, understanding all of the opportunities that come with that and the challenges. I believe and support the supervisor's recommendation in every way, having certainly found through background and others one of the most well-developed candidates that I personally have seen in 44 years in municipal administration, and concur and recommend from your Human Resource Department Brian Bassett's appointment as Director of Public Safety.
Mr. Bassett, would you mind standing, please, so people can get a look at you and maybe step over to the podium? Just a few words I'm going to follow up with is this was an extensive process, both internally and externally. As you see in the packets, Mr. Bassett's resume speaks for itself. His qualifications are extensive. The respect that he has throughout the law enforcement community in southeast Michigan is second to none. As spoken already, the organization that he came from, if I may name it, Southfield PD, and then some time at Sylvan Lake PD as the chief. In both large and small organizations, I think fits our model perfectly here. And his persona, his person, what he represents, I think is a complete asset to continue on what we've done at public safety. And I think turning the reins over to Mr. Bassett as the Public Safety Director is nothing but a positive occurrence for this township. So with that being said, would you like to say anything, Brian?
Is noble, and I see that responsibility and I take it very seriously. I see my job to serve this honorable body, serve our officers in both the law enforcement and fire services so that we can best serve our community. That is what I will do every day as you have made this decision, hopefully very soon, to approve the contract and move forward. I thank you for the opportunity, and I just want to take one moment to thank my family, my wife, my 4 children who are here, and then my parents are here, and for all the support that they have given me and all of the fancy things that you were willing to read off. It was really on their backs that was done, and I can't thank them enough for all of their sacrifice. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Trustee Joseph, please.
I just wanted to congratulate you and thank you for coming to Chesterfield to serve. I was supposed to be on the interview panel on 12/17, and I regret that I wasn't able to be there, but I didn't want to welcome any new candidates with a potential exposure to COVID, so it was better safe to stay home. But I'm glad that you're here. I won't get into great detail tonight, but I think you're coming to the township in an unprecedented time for a new chief. Having been around the township for a long time, I can't recall a new chief coming in, or a new public safety director in this case, coming in to such a polished departments that you will now be leading. Every chief / public safety director, and maybe even going back as far as Trustee Anderson when they were doing it by horseback, every one of them came in to some real problems. There were challenges, whether it be financial or staffing or cumbersome millages that left not enough money in one fund and too much in another. And you come to us at a time where your administrative team is top-notch. In fact, they were all considered for the public safety director, and at that time I was really hoping we could do some internal work. But I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad that you come into the township in such a time when we now have a department in the police that is accredited and just a top-notch organization. And in the fire side, we have our house in order there as well. And your addition to the leadership team is really fortuitous for us, and I'm glad that you're here. Welcome, and I'm glad that your family's here. I hope to see them more as well. And if you need any help with real estate, there's some great locations for property here in the township, and we'd love to see more of you. So welcome.
Thank you, absolutely.
Trustee Domingue?
I'd like to welcome you to Chesterfield. Supervisor Kersten discussed with me when you were being considered and told me all your qualifications, and being in law enforcement, you definitely have been through all the top-notch places that all my superiors have for the departments I've worked for, so I wish you the best, and welcome to Chesterfield, and welcome your family.
Thank you.
Treasurer Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. It's good to see you here, and I want to thank you, first of all, on paper, everything is fantastic, but meeting you in person and having a little bit of a personal conversation and talking to you about your experiences, that's just all the more. And I also want to welcome you to Chesterfield and say hello to your family. I hope to see you more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Quick,
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. Well, just for those of you who may not have looked at the agenda packet, which, by the way, is always available online, you can always see all of the things that we have in our packet. If it's not privileged and confidential, the public has access to by going to the website. But for those of you who didn't have the opportunity to do that, you know, when I reviewed this applicant's, the packet of information that was provided, we have not only recommendations from current chiefs of police, former chiefs of police, former FBI. I mean, I think there was everybody in here. I was looking for a letter from a former president, to be honest with you. It was missing. I expected to see it, but some of the things that caught my attention about this particular applicant and why I'm going to be enthusiastically supporting it as well, we see some real world, yeah, it looks great on paper, but I'll tell you, when you look at the actual strategies that have been implemented, the level of professionalism that's evidenced here, a 45% reduction in overall crime in past appointments, reduction in costs while still maintaining a high level of service. That's exactly what we do here. I know that I've said it for many years that one of my goals in my capacity is to provide the highest quality of service at the lowest possible cost, and this applicant has proven that he's done that in his arena over and over again, and I feel that we are getting a tremendous value. The community is getting a tremendous value in this applicant, and for those of you who haven't had the opportunity, that agenda packet will be online forever, and I recommend going on and looking, seeing some of the comments for yourself. I think the residents of this community will be incredibly pleased that after a vote is taken, that this will be looks like our new public safety director. Very proud. Thank you.
Thank you, Clerk Berry. Trustee Anderson.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Trustee Joseph. The earth had cooled by the time I sat in on the first one of the first opportunities to select a chief back in the mid-90s. I think there's been the involvement, including our supervisor Kersten, I think, has been 5 chiefs I have some knowledge about, and I'd have to put you in the top tier with only a couple others. You come here with a tremendous pedigree, a lot of accomplishment, positive things, and I wish you well, continued success here. And I'll leave it right there and get back to my buckboard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Anderson. Any further comments from the board? Comments from the public? Seeing no comments from the public, I have a motion by Supervisor Kersten, supported by Trustee DeMink, to approve the recommendation of Supervisor Kersten for the employment agreement for Brian Bassett for the position of Public Safety Director. Clerk Berry.
Supervisor Kersten.
Aye.
Trustee DeMink.
Aye.
Trustee Anderson.
Aye.
Trustee Joseph.
Aye.
Treasurer Elliott.
Aye.
Clerk Berry, aye.
Thank you. Clerk Berry. If you'd like to step forward, we'll swear you in right now.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of this state,
and the Constitution of this state,
and that I will faithfully perform the duties
and I will faithfully perform the duties
of the Office of Public Safety Director
of the Office of Public Safety Director
in and for the Township of Chesterfield,
in and for the Township of Chesterfield,
County of Macomb,
County of Macomb,
State of Michigan,
State of Michigan,
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, sir.
Thank you.
Please sign the oath book for me.
You got some big shoes to fill, my friend. That is true. Yeah. Size 14. Yeah. Clerk, do I or just? What I'm going to do right now is I'll ask the board for a little latitude on the agenda item. If I can reconstitute the consent agenda and bring up Deputy Clerk Ellen Clark to recognize her. So I got lost in the consent agenda there. My apologies, Ellen. No disrespect intended. In fact, nothing but praise for you. So Clerk Barry, do I need a roll call for this? Or? Okay. Ellen, would you mind coming forward? Ellen, for your years of service, we do have a proclamation for you that Clerk Barry will read. And again, my apologies for messing up the consent agenda.
Proclamation to recognize Ellen Clark on her 44 years of service. Whereas Ellen Clark lived in Warren until she was 9 years old when she moved to Chesterfield Township and has lived here ever since. And whereas Ellen Clark began her career here at Chesterfield Township on October 11, 1977, and has worked in several positions, including receptionist, bookkeeper, IT coordinator, investment and collections coordinator, and deputy treasurer. She has been recognized as the Employee of the Year several times. She served as the treasurer of the Economic Development Commission and the Planning Commission secretary from 1977 to 1986. And whereas Ellen is a certified public finance administrator, a Michigan certified professional treasurer, and has a certificate of internal controls program. She has an associate of applied science from Macomb Community College. And whereas Ellen is a true pillar of the township and has dedicated her life work to its operation, gaining her trust and respect of all those who work with her. And whereas Ellen is the knower of all things and is a very dedicated and loyal worker, she is knowledgeable, kind, and hardworking. Her presence and expertise will be missed. Now, therefore, on this 11th day of January 2022, on behalf of the Charter Township of Chesterfield, the Township Board of Trustees does hereby honor Ellen Clark for her commitment and impact she has made in our community. We hope she enjoys her retirement as it is well deserved for her many years of service.
There will be no dinosaur reference, but 44 years is a long time for this township. So, Ellen, your time is greatly appreciated, and good luck on whatever your future endeavors are, and enjoy, please.
Well, I thank the board and past boards and everything else. It's been a great run. I've learned a lot. I've met a lot of great people. And I feel fortunate to have worked for this community for that long. Thank you.
We'll return to the regular agenda, item 9B. Clerk Berry.
Item 9B is approval of an employment agreement for a deputy treasurer to be named.
Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Motion by Treasurer Elliott, supported by Clerk Berry, to approve 9B. Comments from the board? I'm sorry. My apologies. Director Duchesne.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. The Deputy Treasurer, Treasury Coordinator has given notice of retirement, and obviously we just recognized her with a resolution, effective February 1st, 2022. This position is responsible for various Treasury daily accounting, record keeping, and investment tracking, and is represented by AFSCME Local 1917 Bargaining Unit. The employee in this position has also been appointed Deputy Treasurer as required by the Charter Township Act. Pursuant to state law, Treasurer Elliott is the appointing authority for the Deputy Treasurer and may use any method that is deemed necessary by the Treasurer to recruit, select, and appoint the Deputy. The Coordinator position is defined by the personnel rules, contracts, and collective bargaining agreement administered by the Supervisor in Human Resources. The Treasurer has determined to separate the position, appointing one person to the Deputy Treasury position and separate and distinct from the contractual Treasury Coordinator position. The decision of who to appoint is exclusively the Treasurer's. The adopted budget of 2022 allocates funding for one combined Treasurer Coordinator Deputy. The Human Resource Department recommends that if the Deputy Treasurer is appointed, the contract submitted to the board will provide for a salary of $72,000 with at-will terms and benefits. Initial analysis of the budget indicates this action will be within the Treasury allocated expenditures. Upon board approval, the Treasurer will use the employment agreement to appoint a deputy. This has been also resolved as far as the option to appoint an at-will deputy. In March 19th of 2020, we worked with the union to separate those positions should a choice be made in the future for distinction between the represented position and the deputy position. So with that, you have been provided with a proposed employment agreement for your consideration.
Thank you, Director Duchesne. Treasurer Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. I know that the board has a lot of discussion, and I'd ask that at this point that we kind of discuss the position and within the budget, and maybe stay away from the person, and maybe just kind of start off there, because this is a big change to the structure for the first time. However, this was modeled after structures in most most township governments. And so first of all, I'm proposing a similar structure at this change, and I think that we need to have the conversation and decide as a board whether or not we want to keep it with the current structure. If you don't mind, if we can start the conversation off there, I think that would be probably to get a good gauge of where everybody's coming from and questions. Currently, the statutory duties are budgeted to pay $3,000 annually for the deputy treasurer position. And so in order to make an offer to anyone for $250 a month, that's not very realistic. So just want to bring that to the board, and I know that there are questions, so.
Thank you, Treasurer Elliott. Any further comments from the board?
Yes, Mr. Supervisor, I have
Trustee Jones.
I have several. I'm not entirely sure the structure of the discussion that has been recommended by the treasurer. Seems like there's not much room for discussion, that the process that has been rolled out, and I think articulated by the deputy supervisor, I noticed very carefully that he said this is a lawful practice, that it is within the bounds of the statutory responsibilities of the treasurer. I thought that was a very diplomatic and favorable position to present, and there was no expounding on how wildly, I would say, one, inappropriate and outside the bounds of everything that has been done by the elected, full-time elected officials who have within their ability to appoint deputies. There is nothing consistent about this merging of positions or separating and then merging back and then interviewing candidates without any board knowledge of a change in policy and arriving at a candidate. And it wasn't until I really didn't hear anything except for a phone call from the treasurer today, hours before the meeting, on this monumental shift in the appointment of deputies. I would, as we have done in the past, look at each elected official has the ability to name a deputy, but that responsibility came with what has been, I would say, arguably a stipend to an existing employee. And what troubles me the most about this particular department is what we had in an earlier agenda item. We recognized 44 years of service. She has been a fixture in this community, and really arguably in every department. The deputy is somebody who has working knowledge of the function of the elected official that they are providing deputy services to. In Clerk Berry, when she came in, I think it would be a fair assessment to say that she received a less than ideal structure to her department. And it was after, I believe it was well into your second term, and an acquisition of a number of trainings, a certification process in the clerk's sort of craft, and a huge investment in understanding the department before you rearranged or proposed a rearrangement. And under that, under the proposal that brought us the deputy clerk, there was some nuances and some changes that reflected good governance, but it was only after a well-understood process. We have a situation now where, no disrespect, there's no way you could acquire Treasury certification in a little over a year that you've served, the treasurer has served. But in order to be an elected official, you don't have to demonstrate. You don't have to arrive at the job with the credentials. You can learn as you go if that's the will of the people. But every elected official that comes into a department comes in with seasoned people that know how to do the job. What you're proposing in this configuration is a political appointment process that attaches to a full-time salary, not a $3,000 stipend, but an entire FTE that we designate as my deputy, combined services that were previously done by the coordinator. And then when that individual leaves office, the new treasurer comes in and inherits a policy that says, I'm not particularly enthused by this political appointee. I'd like to bring in my own deputy, which is now attached to an FTE. That's a problem. And it's a problem because it means that the operational needs of any individual department are now at the will of a political appointee process. And one of the very best conversations I think I ever had with Ellen was talking to her about some of the difficulties that have occurred in the township over the years and different treasurers coming in and out. And to some extent, the elected officials are really travelers in the lives of the dedicated civil servants that do the day-to-day operation in the township. The new elected officials come in, and the people that do the heavy lifting are here, and they're fixtures and they're public servants, and they know their craft and they know their department, and they receive training and they go to training, And what we're asking to do now is upset that entire process and say, every 4 years, not only could the board look different, but all of the supporting staff that the elected officials are allowed to appoint could go out the window too. It's really a very dangerous, it's really a dangerous precedence. Again, no disrespect, but you've only been on the job a year. When you come to the job, you don't come to the job with management experience and all of the things that you're asking your deputy to do. And an individual that comes in should be at least more knowledgeable of the Treasury function than the person they serve. And in this instance, you've recreated the process, you've demanded a contract, unnamed, and then we'll fill in the blank later. I'll reattach my ability to appoint once you give me an FTE and a deputy. It's dangerous, it's reckless, and it fundamentally changes the practices that have been adopted by the other departments. Supervisor Kersten, you gave and appointed to our HR director the title of deputy, but he was an established, tested, knowledgeable individual that could assume the additional responsibilities as your deputy. Clerk Barry, you appointed a deputy after seeing her and evaluating her skill set in your department, and then attached a $3,000 or several $1,000 stipend to the title deputy clerk. That's not what's being proposed here. You have an elected official that comes in a year on the job and now is appointing a deputy with a combination of an FTE, and there's no input from the board on the process. It was done completely unilaterally by the treasurer's office. And I don't know how far we're going to go in the discussion, as you say, but I believe this is a bad practice. And I think in the conversations I've had with other elected officials, it is beyond the pale in terms of what we've done. I don't think our HR director, if asked, would support this, but that's not his role. He's simply assigned a task and can offer insight, but if the individual refuses it, that's the end of the conversation. And I think from, again, I'll reserve some of my comments, but in my investigation of how this unfolded, it really, to me, sounded very ugly in the sense that it was a series of failed meetings that ended with a temper tantrum, and I'm the authority, it's my appointment, and I will do what I want to do. That's wrong. And if we do that, and if we grant the authority to appoint an FTE and a deputy at the same time, anyone who votes for that collectively shares in the responsibility of what could happen. And this is a big job. This is a big, big job. I implore you to please gather the training and the certification, take advantage of the talent pool that you have at your disposal every day. You have elected officials who have done this well, but you're not interested in their advice, you're not interested in their direction, and you brought forward, in my opinion, a half-baked plan that is dangerous and reckless and beyond anything that's been done here. And I would ask you to reconsider your position and recalculate this, and let's try to formulate a policy that reflects the process seen in the other two departments, the other two elected official departments, because this is a really off-the-charts deviation from best practice that you two have demonstrated in your careers here, short and now third term. This is reckless. This is reckless, and I really implore you to revisit and go back and utilize the strength of your team to come up with a better idea.
Thank you, Trustee Joseph. Any further comments from the board? Treasurer Elliott? Any further comments from the board? Treasurer Elliott, if you'd like to respond, please. Clerk Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. I can appreciate the position that Treasurer Elliott is in. As Trustee Joseph alluded to, my first term, I came into an environment that was less than ideal. I knew there were changes that needed to be made. I took some time to evaluate, and when the opportunity presented itself, I was prepared at that time to make the appropriate changes and recommendations to the board, which the board approved. But I completely understand Treasurer Elliott's position, and I think I know what she'd like to achieve, and I think they're honorable. I think exactly what she's trying to achieve is somewhere that I found myself as well, so I can appreciate it. What I can offer is that there are some things that I believe strongly belong with the elected official. Statute supports it, best practices support it, and that is that I believe Treasurer Elliott should have the freedom and flexibility to choose her own deputy as she goes forward with her vision for making her department the best that it can be. And different elected officials have different opinions on how to do that, because first off, we walk into different situations and circumstances in our departments, and there's different things in the different departments that need to be fixed. So one-size-fits-all approach isn't necessarily the one that will work, because I recognize those differences, but at the same time, I think there's some value in looking at some parity among deputies. I think that will make it much easier, not only for the continuation and efficiency of our actions during this term with these elected officials, but also looking to the future and to the next set of elected officials that are coming later. So I think to have, to Trustee Joseph's point, some sort of a structure and some sort of a process moving forward that can be facilitated year after year, administration after administration, so that we have some kind of stability. Even though we face the winds of change with every 4 years. So I can see both points, and I would like to just suggest at this time and offer up any assistance that I can give to the board, to Treasurer Elliott. I'd be happy to do that. I have had some ideas and some thoughts about some of the things that I can suggest that might help us achieve both things. I want to be able to enable that if possible, and as Trustee Joseph said, I actually went through it a couple of times. So it's difficult. Transition is always difficult, but I think that I'd like to offer my assistance in making it a little bit easier to whatever end Treasurer Elliott can utilize that. I'd like to offer that to the board as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Treasurer Elliott.
So statutorily, the deputy treasurer position is to be appointed by the treasurer, and you're shaking your head. So do you mind?
No, that is 100% correct. The treasurer has the absolute and sole right to choose who will be her deputy. The township board, however, sets a compensation for that deputy. But the hiring and firing and choosing is solely within the providence of the treasurer.
So that is where the difficulty is that the agreement that was signed on March 19th of 2020, it makes it very clear that there was a stipend of $3,000 added to somebody who had been the treasurer. So Ellen became the treasurer back in 83. And she was a deputy treasurer in 83, and it was back in the 90s that they came up with this dual role because she already had the experience. There is no other person out there that is Ellen. She is a very unique situation. So what I'm proposing was something similar as a solution, saying to the board, in knowing that these are concerns that have been expressed from day one when I started. The board has expressed concerns over what do we do when Ellen retires, and that was my very first question to Ellen, is when are you thinking of retiring? And she said, it will be while you are in office, I will retire. And so we see that we're here at that day. We have spent the last year working on manuals and every sort of manual and document and going through everything that she does. And I have been doing trainings with the Michigan Township Association and Michigan Municipal Treasurers Association, and in doing as much as you can. I've also, there is nothing about this process that's any different than is done at any other community. This is actually the very normal process. What I will say is that really you have either the current, you can keep the current structure. The current structure works because the person, whether or not that works for a different person is actually as well a concern. So if you have somebody who has this dual role and they are the coordinator and they're getting a $3,000 stipend, at any point in time that person can say, I no longer want to do the deputy treasurer role and I don't want the $3,000 stipend. So now you're back at square one yet again. You can leave it along that, and that is part of the reason why this was placed here, is because this is the first time this township has had to really address this, because we've always had Ellen. And so I, out of respect for the board, want to bring this conversation up to the board and give you time to really think about it. And also, I have hard statutory responsibility to appoint a deputy, and at the end of this month, Ellen will be leaving. So time is of essence for this conversation. Excuse me, I need a drink of water.
Thank you, Treasurer Elliott. Any further comments from the board?
I do.
Trustee Joseph.
Yeah, there is a uniqueness in the sense that you have 44 years experience leaving. And the conversation started with, let's not talk about the individuals, but in terms of Ellen talking about her retirement, I have had conversations with Ellen. And I don't want to disclose them because they're private conversations, but I will tell you from my heart, and no disrespect, I believe you bear some responsibility for the timing of her retirement. And I think it goes to a management style, and you are on full display in the process that you've engaged in to find her replacement with your peers that demonstrates petulance and no desire to take the opinions of your team who have plowed this field before, and they have great insight. They haven't experienced the exact scenario that you find yourself in, but damn close. Duchesne has been all over the place, and he's seen a number of difficult scenarios. He can certainly help you if you're receptive. Clerk Berry, known for her diplomacy, basically said, I can help you, and I've been there. Been there, done that. But it's not her job to convince you that she can help you. So the idea that you found yourself all alone in the wilderness with no pathway out and you're doing the best you can is not a fair representation. Part of the problem is your own doing, and you can undo it just as easily by partnering. But you didn't do that. You didn't reach out to any trustee that I'm aware of, and I can't address Vosburg, but I know Trustee Anderson and I didn't hear a peep until hours before this board meeting, and by then, you had already interviewed a slate of candidates. You have done, in part, what the attorney just advised you regarding your absolute authority to appoint, but as I read our practices, your ability to appoint rests in the compensation package of $3,000. That's not what you're doing with this agenda item, and you sought out no real help from any other board members except asserting your absolute authority to appoint. And yes, you can, but as it's defined now, the deputy treasurer is a $3,000 position. You're coming forward with an employee agreement an employment agreement, a contract in essence, that says I'll fill in the blanks later when I reattach my ability to appoint. But this is the way I want the job to read, and that's not appropriate. That is not part of your statutory afforded guarantee. It is reminiscent of an uglier time in this board's history where elected officials did what they wanted to do in a vacuum and then just sprung it on their partners on the board the day before or the day of the hearing, board meeting. It's unfortunate that you went that route with such tremendous willingness by your peers and your partners to help you navigate, and nobody's arguing 44 years of experience leaves your department, you got a hole, you got a real problem. But you have enough talent around here that are all pulling for the same collective good to help you navigate that, but you've chosen not to do that. You've set a course that you say is consistent with what other communities do. And it may be, but it's beyond the norm here, and it lends itself to a wholesale change with every election cycle. That would be a disastrous outcome. I think there is tremendous peril in the immediate without having an experienced person, which we may just have to navigate that as best we can. But future boards, we are hamstringing them, and we are compromising what has traditionally been an assurance to the residents that no matter who comes into this dais, the operational needs of individual departments will carry on because of the talent that is here in the framework of a full-time employee. You're upsetting all of that. You're turning it upside down, and you're talking about an inherited problem with, Ellen was going to retire. And again, I can't say it strongly enough, and I won't say it any stronger because I'd have to violate confidences, but you share a lion's share of the problem we have now. It's a problem that was not created by you, but certainly nurtured and cultivated, and it's no surprise to me that you find yourself in the situation you are, but it's not too late. I would urge the board to turn this down emphatically, and let's go back to the drawing board with some ideas that work for all of the departments.
Thank you, Trustee Joseph. Any further comments from the board? Trustee Domingue.
This is a whole new animal, as I can see it. Granted, we've all keep going back to Ellen. She's been, 7 or 8 treasurers. You're going from one person to 2. I understand by statute and from the attorney that you can appoint who you want as your deputy and things like that. I think whoever is going to this, whether you pull somebody from the outside or the inside, if you want to pull somebody from the outside, I think you can. But I think whoever that should be should have definitely some type of financial background. An accountant, financial degree, somebody that knows how to deal with money, because that's the treasury. You think treasury, you think dollar signs. So, this is a slippery slope. I'm not too hot for it. I'm not too hot against it. My recommendation is that we table this for a couple meetings to let us all digest it.
Procedurally, we would need to postpone, I believe. The motion would be to postpone for a few meetings, whatever date you decide, Trustee Domingue. But I enthusiastically second your motion to postpone.
Trustee Domingue?
It's fine. I'll make a motion to postpone for 2 meetings.
I will ask, we have an original motion on the board. Do we need to take action on that first? Or will the maker?
This supersedes, a motion to
Supersedes
postpone
motion.
supersedes, I believe.
Yeah, the motion to postpone just needs to be postponed either indefinitely or postponed to a date certain.
So there is a motion now on the floor to postpone item 9B.
Yeah, let's go up to 2 meetings. That way, I just think hold on a minute, I'm going to ask Chris this. because we're going into February.
February 8th meeting.
Okay, hold on a second, but let me ask Chris this, Brad. Because Ellen's official date is February 1st, correct?
No, January 20th.
Okay. If she doesn't have a deputy treasurer for 2 weeks, does that violate any constitutional law or anything, Chris?
Not as far as I'm aware, but I can double check. You are required to appoint. But I don't know if you had a 2-week lag time, that very well may be.
Well, I mean, required to appoint, or is it mandatory you have to have someone? I mean, you got to appoint someone, but can you have a void? You're the legal person, I'm just asking.
Let me do a double check.
I can't hear the attorney's response, but Chris, what I'm curious to know is if statutorily, there's this sort of drop-dead immediacy of a deputy. In essence, you would have to have a deputy pro tem, and that's not structurally consistent with my understanding of MTA. So there are periods of time when unforeseen circumstances, if the deputy quits. What happens to the township if 1 minute after they don't have a deputy replaced, or they're hit by a bus, or this idea that there must be, or you know, darkness will befall the township, and that's the reason, it's kind of silly to me, but I'll wait for the attorney.
I don't know the legal thing.
I appreciate your question, though, I do.
I'm sorry. Trustee Domingue, you have a motion to, or we're waiting for council
Waiting
to-
for council to,
Computer's not gonna work.
Mr. Supervisor, just as an option for consideration, I would like the attorney, to give the attorney an opportunity to review this on a little more full-throated than just being put on the spot. I think we can adopt or take a vote on Trustee Domingue's motion, give the township an attorney an opportunity to formulate an opinion on this, and if we need to take action, we can bring it forward. There's nothing that prevents us from bringing it forward at the last meeting in January, and save our township from impending doom that will certainly befall us if we don't have an appointed deputy. So a 2-week or 2 meeting, and then conditional on the attorney's review and agreement that we'll come back sooner if statutorily and legally we're obligated to do that. I think that could cover us in all arears.
So postpone
It
until
would cover.
February 8th.
If you postpone the agenda item to February 8th, and if there's a mandatory requirement that it be filled immediately, it can be placed on the next agenda.
Yes.
It can be placed on the next agenda.
Trustee Domingue? Treasurer Elliott?
So here's the thing. So yes, I have the MTA book here. So if you don't have somebody there, you have to have somebody on all the bank accounts. You have to have, so you're in the middle of a pandemic, right? You have COVID. So say you don't have a deputy, nobody else is authorized to sign the checks other than me. So if you don't have a deputy, you can't, I can't, if I'm in the hospital, you can't have anybody else sign the checks. There has to be 2 signatures, one of the clerk and one of the treasurer. Nobody else is able to make those investments or do the banking on behalf of the township. It's, of course, yes, let's say I'm in healthy condition, but I don't know, there's the unknowns. That's why the state statute has you, has it written that you must appoint a deputy, and a deputy clerk and a deputy treasurer. To mock it or what have you, it makes no sense to me. If you wanted to postpone it, what I find interesting is it is really my statutory duties, and the responsibility falls on me. I'm not a victim, and I don't appreciate being saying that I was a victim. Ellen has been here for 44 years. She became a treasurer in 1983. She was going to retire. When that was and why.
The motion on the floor is a motion to postpone.
Yes,
Motion on
it
the floor
is.
is a motion to postpone.
Yes, I apologize. So I will stick to the motion to postpone. If we can postpone for the next meeting, I'd appreciate it. That's fine.
Motion on the floor to postpone item 9B until February 8th, which would be the next immediate meeting.
So let me ask this real quick, since you brought this up.
Trustee-
Let me, real quick, so she's worried about can the supervisor or the clerk sign the checks?
Can we appoint an in?
Cindy's nodding her head down there that she can. I'm just asking, I'm just asking questions, that's all I'm doing.
So, a couple of things. I'm sorry, I need to be recognized by the
Clerk,
chair.
please.
Thank you. I don't want to speak and be out of order. So a couple of things. I found myself in this position as well over the course of the last 9 years, and that is I had a deputy who became very gravely ill and was out for months, and I had no deputy, for all intents and purposes, for about 7 or 8 months. So I think Treasurer Elliott's concerns are absolutely valid. I mean, those are things that need to be addressed, but they can be addressed. I was told there have been also situations where I was informed, in fact, Deputy Treasurer Clark actually informed me at one point that there is only one signature required on the checks unless that policy is changed with the banks. Either the treasurer or the clerk could sign it, but it is best to have the clerk warrants the checks and then they're signed by both. But even if that weren't to be the case, I assure Treasurer Elliott that I will do everything I can to assist if you find yourself without a deputy, even for a short period of time. We will certainly do everything we can to accommodate whatever the situation may be, and I believe that there are ways to do that and to manage that should that be the case where we find ourselves not able to access the treasurer or not having a deputy at that time. I know that we have navigated that in the clerk's area a couple of times over the last 8 years.
Thank you, Clerk Berry.
The bank does not require more than one signature, but statutorily, you are required to have the two signatures in our policy also. So that is, but the bank does not require it. That's what Ellen was referring to.
Mr. Supervisor?
But I can appoint an interim deputy.
Trustee Domingue, do you have something else?
No, my thing is, okay, if we're gonna do it for the February 8th meeting, let me finish. As long as the checks can get signed and people can get paid, that's my thing, okay? You know, I don't wanna throw, you know, if Cindy can sign it, the clerks can sign it, fine. If not, then we'll just go to the end of January meeting if it's gonna throw too much of a wrench into it.
Continued support for, sorry, Mr. Supervisor. Continued support for the motion to postpone until the February meeting, contingent on a equitable plan or insight from our attorney that changes that, causing us to come forward. I think, however, quite a challenge with that language, Clerk Berry, but I think the essence of what we're trying to accomplish here, and just a quick apology, it was no intent to mock the need to have a deputy, but it's gotten so trivial now. It's as if Ellen never went on vacation or a cruise and was unreachable. So do we have a stand-in? Do we have a deputy pro tem? And those are preposterous arguments expediting this unnecessarily. So we have a resolution, and I continue to support for the motion to postpone.
There's a motion on the floor by Trustee Domingue, supported by Trustee Joseph, to postpone item 9B until February 8th. Any further comments from the board? Comments from the public?
John Speaka, 53978 Connor Drive. Treasurer Elliott wants the township board to believe that there is nobody in Chesterfield here that works here at the municipal building that would be a prime candidate for that position. That's nonsense. The board must remember that the board sets the compensation for the new treasurer, or not the treasurer, but the deputy treasurer. So I want you to keep one thing in mind. Treasurer Elliott comes to you now and wants you to vote to appoint her deputy treasurer that she's interviewed. But keep this in mind. Hank, she went behind your back. Dave, she went behind your back. Supervisor Kersten, as far as I know, she went behind your back. Scott, Brian, she went behind your back. Now, after she went behind everybody's back,
Mr. Speaker, would you speak to the point?
this is the
It
point,
is not.
Supervisor
Please,
Kersten.
I'm going to call you out of
So-
order. Please, speak to the point.
It is the point. She went behind everybody's back.
Mr. Supervisor, the motion on the floor is the motion to postpone. So I understand the speaker's concerns, but this is not a debate.
Correct.
I'm sorry. The debate that we're engaged in, all the supporters, I understand it is the motion to postpone. And so whether or not it's a good idea is certainly within the prerogative of the speaker, but I understand the frustration, but this is not the appropriate time for the
Correct.
specifics outside of the motion to postpone.
Please speak to the point and motion that was made.
I agree with postponing this to a further date.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Further comments from the public?
Joe Kadich, I live on Sutton. I agree with the fact that you should be postponing this, or voting to postpone this. But the only observation I have to make this point is looking at this whole thing the way it's gone down, with Treasurer Elliott basically trying to change everything within her department with very, very little experience in that department, is, I think, the wrong person retired. I really do.
Any further comments from the public? Seeing no further comments from the public, I'll bring it back up to the board. No comments from the board. I have a motion to postpone item 9B until February 8th. Clerk Berry.
Trustee Demink.
Aye.
Trustee Joseph.
Aye.
Trustee Anderson.
Aye.
Treasurer Elliott.
No.
Supervisor Kersten.
Aye.
Clerk Berry. Aye.
Item 9C.
Item 9C is to approve a request to transfer a Class C liquor license with Sunday sales permit to the Craft Shack DBA Bellasinos located at 52298 Gratiot Avenue, Chesterfield, Michigan, 48051, and adopt resolution number 2022-02.
So moved.
Support.
A motion by trustee Demink, supported by trustee Joseph. Comments from the public, or comments from the board? Trustee Demink?
I think this gentleman's got to do with it, but I'm good.
Clerk Berry,
Yeah.
Clerk Berry, please.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. Would just like the board to be aware that the Clerk's Department has received all applicable and required elements to consider this item. As you know, in the past, this is standard operating procedure for when an applicant would like to request a transfer and grant to another. The board does not approve nor deny. We simply recommend, and that recommendation is taken into consideration by the Liquor Control Commission, who makes that decision, but all items, required elements are in order.
Thank you, Clerk Berry. I'm assuming you're the petitioner please identify yourself for the Bellasinos location.
Yes, good evening, everybody. My name is Sean Gargalino. This is my wife, Audra Gargalino, and we do own the Bellasinos now in the Craft Shack.
Any further comments or questions from the board for the petitioner? None. Trustee Joseph.
Just thank you to the Gargalinos. That's a great place, and I'm excited to see what you do with it, and happy that you've taken on this, and it is truly a family endeavor. It's very clear, and I wish you all the best. It's a great location, and I'm excited to see what you do with it. So congratulations and thank you.
Much appreciated, thank you.
Comments from the public? Seeing no further comments from the public, I have a motion by trustee Demink, supported by trustee Joseph, to approve item 9C. Clerk Berry.
Trustee Demink.
Aye.
Trustee Joseph.
Aye.
Trustee Anderson.
Aye.
Treasurer Elliott.
Aye.
Supervisor Kersten.
Aye.
Clerk Berry, aye.
Congratulations, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Regular item 9D, Clerk Berry.
Item 9D is to approve a recommendation to purchase the BSNA inventory cloud-based module from BSNA in the amount of $16,835 and annual service fee in the amount of $9,715.
Thank you. Director Duchesne, Deputy Duchesne. We need a motion. I'm sorry. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Clerk Berry, I'll support that motion. Deputy Duchesne.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. As we've proceeded with the review of the implementation of the additional BSNA cloud-based module and other actions, including a review of the way we manage assets and the asset record-keeping system, it became clear that the addition of the module that is asset tracking that interfaces with the other aspects of the utility system and the general ledger in BSNA would be appropriately melded together to work in controlling, as mentioned earlier, inventory control, replacement of inventory, and changes. Now, at the same time, as we've gone into this, we have pending a change order to reduce costs in the Microsoft service area about $20,000 from what was originally anticipated. Excuse me. So the net actually is still going to be a reduction of $4,000 when that change order is processed. And we recommend the asset management module be instituted along with the rest of your BSNA systems so that the appropriate materials, capital equipment is coordinated with the use of the rest of the system. I think it's an opportunity to do it, and really a necessity if you really want to make things work correctly in this. The Public Works Department has indicated through the processes that have been undertaken, including external review and systems they have in place, put in spreadsheet schedules and things, as was mentioned by Assistant Director Johnson earlier. He mentioned how they're controlling inventory and doing that. This module works right into that and would be an enhancement in process to that. So we recommend you authorize that and encompass that into our BSNA module. Again, keeping in mind that the net change we're going to have in a change order, a reduction of $20,000, offsets the $16,000 of the acquisition of this module.
Thank you. I'll bring it up to the board. Trustee Anderson.
Yeah, question is, how this BSNA procedure, as far as for looking at inventory of supplies, I understand it might be the product as far as work hours and all that. How far along is the implementation actually going with this BSNA process?
Some would say too fast. Some would say, boy, it's going to take a little while. But we're looking at a major change would be about July, I think, to just, be summarized. It's going to, we're actually kind of waiting on BSNA and their schedule now, and they've indicated some of the major change will be in July and then towards the end of the year, Trustee Anderson. So it is actually going on right now, but waiting for them to provide the time to make the transition. And that's really up to BSNA, but we're looking at a time, everybody does not want it at a certain time of the year, so BSNA finally called it and said the weeks of July we have major changeover taking place. I wish I could be more specific for you, but that is the date in general, and then there'll be some September, as well as the end of the year, there'll be some transitional time to get the entire modules online and up to the cloud and working and operating together.
I'll follow up on that, Trustee Anderson. There is a timeline that BSNA gave us, an implementation timeline, and it is almost 12 months. And then certain modules, certain departments come online at various times, and then there's a checks and balances to make sure the system works. It interfaces correctly with what we do here and what we want, and then there's an employee training period. So the timeline, in fact, I'll publish it, we'll get it out to the board so they can see it, and you'll be familiar with it. This is a culture change inside here, and a records management change. So it's trying to do this, and they've done this in other places, but trying to do it with consideration to everybody involved. Trustee Jules? You
use the word culture change, and that was really my question. This isn't a isolated training. This is a way of doing business that is, in some ways, new, I guess. So the only other question that I had was there any training opportunities? Because I remember when we originally talked about this, BS&A actually has a pretty robust training academy. Is there any opportunity to send some of the more critical users to training and familiarize themselves with, prior to the implementation? Can we start that process while we're waiting?
That is underway right now.
Excellent.
There are elements of training that are occurring with our employees. There is a reoccurring training. There's an interface training. Both BS&A will be coming here, and then there's an online academy.
Excellent.
So
Thank you.
that, again, that's the timeline, that getting everybody up to speed. And I'll make sure that we publish it and get it to you. Any further comments from the board? Comments from the public? Any further comments from the public? Bring it back up to the board. I have a motion by Clerk Berry, supported by Supervisor Kersten, to approve 9D. Clerk Berry?
Clerk Berry, aye. Supervisor Kersten.
Aye.
Trustee Anderson.
Aye.
Trustee Joseph.
Aye.
Trustee Demink.
Aye.
Treasurer Elliott.
Aye.
Item 9E. Clerk Berry.
Item 9E is to receive the final report of the Morris Demink Anchor Bay Pump Station Study.
Just some quick comments from the supervisor. This was one of the first major multi-million-dollar problems that they were trying to address. We latched onto it, or I latched onto it with Director Johnson, tried to dive into it and analyze it. We've spent the past couple of weeks, months actually, looking at it and assessing it. We brought the engineers back in to create a new timeline and kind of study it and see how we can do this in the most economical fashion, because again, the cost of this is rather high. So with that, Director Johnson, please.
Yeah, good evening, Board. I'd like to thank OHM, especially Steve Siklich and Carrie Bond behind me here. They've worked tirelessly on this project for the last 12 months. This has been a 2-year culmination, with the first year with us gathering information, data, compiling stuff to give to them. So this has been a long task that we've been, I don't want to say happy to report, but at least it gives us a good snapshot of where this building is at and what's going on, and how we can improve it in the future. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve Siklich to start, and then I'll cap it off with some brief information.
Thanks, Kevin, and good evening, Mr. Supervisor, members of the board. I know everybody's excited to hear about pump stations here, but we did deliver a final report on this evaluation to the township before the holiday back in November. So what we're going to attempt to do here is at least kind of lay that out for you in a little more understandable nature, and put into perspective kind of the important things that you should focus on looking forward. So a little bit of background. What is the Maurice Demink Anchor Bay Pump Station? It's a large stormwater pump station. It's off of Jefferson near Sugar Bush Road, just off of the Meldrum Drain. It serves an area approximately 1 square mile, and approximately 800 homes are impacted by this station. It was originally designed and built in the early 1970s, so it's roughly 50 years old at this point. So why did we perform this study? As was kind of alluded to, there's some issues with the station that were experienced prior to the study being performed and are actually still being experienced now. Power loss is a big one, so there have been a number of power outages at the station. It is half powered by electric motors, so when you lose power, you lose half your station's pumping capacity. So that's obviously a concern. There's also been flooding upstream due to that. So what we're trying to do here is minimize those impacts moving forward. You know, we can't control Mother Nature, but we can control our assets. So some of the big issues here that I wanted to point out, it does have 4 pumps, 4 motors, assemblies. 2 are diesel, 2 are electric. The diesels are both original, so 1950s is when they were put in, haven't been replaced since. As you can imagine, those are difficult to repair, difficult to get parts for. One of them was actually not operational when we started the study, couldn't start. I know it leaks oil, it has cooling problems. Other ones kind of in the same boat. Tough to start, tough to keep cool, tough to keep running. Those are your backup pumps. They don't run very often, but in large events you do need them. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, but you have at times run 3 of these 4 pumps during certain events, right? So you do need them for certain events. Again, they're backup, but they do have a lot of problems. The 2 electric motors that were put in the station were actually to replace the existing 2 diesels. Those electric motors were installed in the early 2000s. They've been maintained over that time period, but have not been rehabilitated since. Those also have some issues. Actually, one of the gearboxes on the electric motor had some vibration and there was some leaking. So that was one of the issues that prompted us to evaluate those motors. And then some other issues, there's some HVAC equipment. Again, everything is original equipment. Nothing's been replaced in 50 years other than, ongoing maintenance. So you have some HVAC equipment that doesn't work, some heaters that don't work. You have a sump pump in the wet well that doesn't work. Another item is a lot of accumulation of sand in the wet well. And obviously that, creates issues for the pumps operating long-term. It's kind of like sandblasting, the paint off your car. When you're drawing up sand into these pumps, time and time again, it wears away the steel. So those are the issues, the major issues. There are others, but the major issues of why we conducted this study. And I just want to emphasize, while I go through these objectives, we're here to help the township navigate these problems. This is a complex station. These are not on every corner. They're large pumps, they're special order pumps, and we want to build a plan for you that's going to give you the best bang for your buck long term. And we understand it's a big financial investment up front. So just kind of highlighting some of these objectives, and Carrie's going to talk a little bit further about some of that assessment. We wanted to put together a comprehensive plan for the station. There are some items like roofing and lighting that township is already currently working on improving, so we didn't get into those too much detail, but in general, we wanted to do a full inventory of all the major assets, assign them a condition, assign them a criticality, and determine what the remaining life is, and if they need to be replaced, identify them to be replaced. The 2 other big objectives, sorry, I'm still on the last slide, but the 2 other big objectives, and really the biggest objective, number 2, is to evaluate the current pump system in place and identify alternatives for that system that can last another 20 to 40 years. So you have a combination of different style pumps, or they're all the same style pump, different power driven. We looked at things like, can you use natural gas? Can you use generator backup? Is diesel more appropriate? So there's a lot of things we went through during that decision process to come up with the final selected alternative. And finally, probably most importantly, is determine a conceptual budget cost. So what are these improvements going to take? So we have done that in our report. We're not going to dive into the complete asset inventory list unless there's questions, but that information is available in the report in full. So what did we look at? Just some major categories here. We did not look at the outlet, the effluent piping from the station that goes to the Meldrum drain and out to the lake. But I did want to include that on here because it's a large pipe. It's a 68 by 106 inch pipe. Rough math, that's about 9-foot diameter. So you can almost drive a car through it. So it's a large pipe, runs along Jefferson about 1,200 feet from the station down to the drain. During the study, when we operated the pumps, we actually noticed water pumping up at the ground surface. So there's issues with that pipe. We know there are. It just was not inspected as part of this, but I wanted to highlight it here to let the board know that is something that will have to be looked at in the future. Other things like the building envelope, again, we didn't get into the brick, the roof, structural components. We did look generally at the condition of some of the structure, the flooring, the walls, the wet well, and everything appeared to be, at least from a structure standpoint, in good condition. We did not drill down. We did not do a structural analysis other than kind of a high overview to accommodate these pumping systems. But as far as those components are concerned, we didn't notice anything alarming. You know, but we did, where appropriate, note in that inventory what needed to be addressed. The big thing, obviously, again, is the 2 diesel stormwater pumps, 2 electric stormwater pumps, and their associated components. So those are the major things we want to talk about, and Carrie's going to get into those a little bit in a couple of slides. You know, other things, electrical, mechanical, plumbing, again, those are associated components. Instrumentation and control, a lot of, you know, half the stations run manually right now. I know one of the things that we wanted to do is get some automation into that system. You know, when you get a rain event at 3 a.m., someone's got to go to the station and activate those pumps. So without that remote control, you know, that's going to continue into the future. So those are things that we did incorporate at a high level and look at, you know, what would be needed to make the appropriate adjustments moving forward, but we're not going to drill into those too much right now. So what does this equipment look like? And we've got a ton of pictures. We actually did deliver, it's a little too cumbersome to run here, but we did deliver a 360 scan of the station to the township where you can actually zoom, pan, and tilt around the entire station. If anyone wants to get a better idea of what's in there, that is something that's available. But generally speaking, these are the pumps, the pump systems, I'll call them. There's only 3 of them in the picture. There's one behind me in that picture. That first one, the yellow one, that's the diesel. That's the 50-year-old original equipment. The 2 that are furthest away from the picture, the gray boxes, those are the electric-driven motors. They all have the same setup. It's a motor, a right-angle drive with a gearbox, and then going into the floor is the pump shaft and pump column. That component is not accessible to be inspected or repaired unless it's removed. It's a large station, pumps are large, you need to open up the roof and you need to pull them out with a crane. So everything you do here is going to be challenging, has to be thought out, but I just wanted to give you a kind of an overview of what those motors and pump assemblies are we're talking about. On the right-hand side are the pump columns. Those extend about 30 foot into the floor down to a wet well. That's where all the stormwater flow from this entire area drains to. And those pumps, there's an impeller inside that turns and draws the water up and out. That wet well is full of sand right now, about 4 foot of sand. So that's something that needs to be cleaned, but as far as priority is concerned, that's a little bit lower on the scale. The big thing is you have 4 pumps. One of them was removed during our inspection process, and I don't want to steal Carrie's thunder, but it wasn't put back in because it was not safe to do so. So you have 3 pumps now that I would say are maybe half working at best. So our focus here is to provide you with a phased solution that can at least keep you operating in the short term and into the future. And with that, I will turn it over to Carrie to talk a little bit more about the evaluation and inspection. Give me this. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to go over the evaluation that we did. As Steve alluded to, I don't want to belabor the point, but the heart of this system to get the stormwater from the collection area out to the lake is the 4 pumps. They are the 2 main electric pumps are the main heart of the station. They've been used the most, and then we have the 2 diesels as the backups. So when we got into this process, we put all the cards on the table of the various options, from just maintaining what we have to replacing all 4 pumps with brand new electric pumps, with one being the lowest cost, one being the highest cost, and then options. So we ended up looking at 5 different options. Weighted criteria for those evaluations included, what would be the capacity of the station to handle stormwater? What would the capital cost be? What would the reliability and operations be? And then also, how could we potentially improve automation of the stations so that the operations team doesn't have to be there at certain times? So all those were weighted and evaluated. And obviously, capital cost is probably the most important thing, but some of these other criteria are also important when evaluating your options. So we looked at that, as well as the whole, as Steve said, the whole station, more from an asset management standpoint, get a good handle on all the assets that we want to sort of keep tabs on moving forward, what their condition is now, continue to monitor those in the future, and then help us make priority decisions on where the best bang for the buck should be on getting the station back up to the capacity it needs to be for the original design to handle stormwater. We can go to the next slide. So these are big pumps, and so as Steve mentioned, you can't see the pump unless you remove it. So part of the study included removal of one of the pumps, and at the time, we thought we would inspect it, rehabilitate it, and put it back in. But what we found was excessive wear and excessive damage on the pumps had happened over the course of the last 45, 50 years. If you can go to the next slide, it gives you a better feel for the size of what we're talking about. So that's that 30 feet. So the top of that pump is floor level, and that's the shaft and the pump tube that sits in the wet well, and it's drawing the water towards the bottom of the wet well, lifting it about 23 feet so that it can flow by gravity out to the lake. So not a small piece of equipment. And so when we pulled that out and had the pump folks look at it, they came back with, wow, we've lost a lot of steel on this. Things from wear, from the sand, also from potential issues with the water levels, letting the pump operate efficiently, also caused some damage over time. And what they came back with said, but we've lost too much steel on this pump to replace it. So that's where we're coming to the township with a plan, as discussed, initially here, to phase it and to address. We need to get a pump in here that's going to be back up to full capacity and have. I'm sorry. Yeah, here's the slide showing some of that wear and loss. What we're looking at there is the impeller. So that's the spark. That's the piece that's spinning and moving the water up the shaft, and it's somewhat compelling but hard to see in that picture, but there's quite a bit of loss and quite a bit of efficiency loss when the impeller is damaged like that. So I guess I don't know if we talk about the phased improvements, but I guess summary of findings. So that pump that we were just looking at was the one that was pulled. Because it's not repairable, it has not been reinstalled. We suspect that pump 3 is also damaged in a similar fashion. They both ran as the workhorses of this station and both run about the same amount of time under the same conditions. So we're assuming that both of those pumps are in similar condition. The good news is the two pumps on the diesels have been run very little, and we have a high degree of confidence that those pumps are probably in pretty good order as far as efficiency. I actually was there on a day that we ran pump 3 and 4, and we weren't pumping as much water as I thought we should be, and then we brought on pump 1, which is the one diesel that's working, and the pump station rate went right up. So that gives me a good level of confidence that those two pumps are in good condition. We just need to get the power to them replaced, i.e. those generators. So we've got some other pieces and parts that Steve mentioned that should be addressed but aren't as critical. Right now the criticality is getting the pump capacity back up to a reliable level to handle upcoming storms. And did you want to talk about the phased approach?
Unless you have something you want to say on them.
Just a couple more things. So the technology when these pumps were put in is they are driven horizontal motor to a gearbox, transferring the power to a vertical pump. The current modern day replacement of that no longer needs a gearbox. The motor is directly on top of the pump. So for the pumps 3 and 4 that we would replace, those motors would be directly on top of the pump, and you would no longer need that gear drive. So that's eliminating a mechanical process that wouldn't have to be maintained in the future. So that's sort of an advancement. The other thing is we talked with Michigan Department of Transportation. They operate a lot of these types of stations, and many of the stations are in the same type of time frames. They've actually gone through a period of time where when they came to replace these vertical turbine pumps, they made a decision to go to submersible pumps, which is a same centrifugal pump style, but the motor and the pump all sit in the wet well down, not like this where the motor is above. They, after doing that over the last 20 years, have come to the conclusion that they prefer the vertical style turbine pumps and have now gone back to where pumps need to be replaced, going back to the vertical style turbine pumps, and that's what the township has. So, you know, that's a learning curve that we can pick from, because we also looked at submersible pumps as one of the options. Costs are somewhat similar, but the fact that these have the motors at floor level where they're serviceable, can be maintained without having to do the very expensive pulling of the whole pump with a crane. They found that cost was much more prohibitive and didn't allow them to inspect because of that crane and the heavy weight needed to pull those out. So by talking with MDOT, we're confident that the vertical style turbine pumps that we recommend to be replaced in what you have would be the way to go. So anyways.
And I'll just add to that, you know, all in all, what did we find? Roughly $4 million of work is needed on the station itself, with another potential, you know, $1 million needed for the outlet sewer. Again, we did not inspect that sewer, but this is just an estimate based on kind of our own observations and experience. But for that large capital cost on the station improvement, you know, after meeting with, you know, township staff and officials a couple of times, we did determine that we could acceptably phase this project over at least several years, one of which would be, you know, initially getting in a working pump and a working backup, so at least you have full control. That would be the short-term urgent need, along with continued maintenance as well as emergency bypass plans. Should there be another catastrophic failure on one of the other pumps or a large rain event that impacts that station, you would at least have the means to accommodate the stormwater flow. So initially, that would be the first step. You know, longer term, we still feel that all those pumps and motors and tubes all need to be replaced. Again, that's something that you could do over a few years. You know, you get into the building with, you know, lighting and HVAC and other miscellaneous components, you know, it doesn't make sense or that much sense if you can turn on the lights if you can't actually operate it. So, you know, there is an order of priority that that needs to happen. We think that can be phased, and what we are working on now is coming up with what that phased approach looks like, what dollar cost that phased approach might be, so that we can bring it back to the board likely next month for some more discussion and hopefully determination on proceeding with at least the short-term approach. You know, I would note in this current climate, we're seeing, and I think Kevin even mentioned about his meters being delayed from 5 weeks to 12 weeks. We're seeing unprecedented, you know, shortages of materials and labor across the market, supply chain disruptions. These pumps, if I were to order them today, take 30 to 38 weeks to get shipped to us. So without even design, you know, we're looking at August, September before this pump even gets put in. And as you look at a phased approach, I don't know if the costs are going to go up. I don't know if they're going to go down. You know, that's all going to be dictated by kind of the market and, you know, material availability. So there is the chance, as you push out some of this work, that cost does start to creep up. But again, this is just what we think the value is today of these repairs. Obviously, we hope in a competitive bid scenario that value will be less, but to give you kind of an indication of the magnitude, this is what we think it is right now. And with that, Kevin, is there anything that you wanted to add on top of that discussion?
Yep. So just so you guys are aware of the operation of this station, over the last 20 years, the station has had roughly 9,928 hours of operation on the two pumps, which equates to roughly 496 hours a year, 41 hours a month, or 1.4 hours per day. In the last 3 years, it's run 572 hours per year, 47 hours per month, or roughly 1.6 hours per day. So the the use of it has increased. Obviously, we had the flooding issues going on the past few years, so the wear has increased. So, and a lot of the times this station might not operate in July and August because obviously rainfall is few and far between. It's typically spring or fall is our heaviest rain event, so it runs for hours on end. I would say typically in the spring, if it runs for an hour and a half to 2 hours, it'd be a standard run time for the pump. Because not only is the wet well holding water, some of the ditch or the pipe that goes along the ditches and stuff is holding water as well, along with that. So it runs a long time. So, you know, it is an extensive amount of money that we got to spend in this station. We understand it's, you know, tough as a board to have to determine how we're going to spend all this money to make all this work. So we're going to hopefully find an approach that can be, I guess, as painless as possible, but it, you know, hopefully get this time frame in a 3 to 4 year window, hopefully to get all this completed in a manner that we can keep this station running and functioning.
Thank you, gentlemen. And I'll bring it back, just one more statistic that we did some research on, that roughly the water and sewer fund funneled or paid around $31,000 a year over the last 20 years to maintain service, whether it be the pumps or the buildings. So it's been an economical building, but obviously it is a critical infrastructure for that region of the township that needs to be serviced. So thank you, gentlemen. I'll bring it back. Any questions from the board? Clerk Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. I have a couple question and then a comment. As we discuss this, this is an issue that is not new to us. We've been discussing this for, I think, 4 or 5 years, as far as I can remember back. So my one question is, obviously, as this pump station gets older and we have more and more challenges with it, is there a plan in place to manage the spring rains? And if we are going into fall, the fall rains, should there be a colossal failure in this particular pump station? Secondly, and Director Johnson, Assistant Director Johnson alluded to this, but I have a concern as well, is balancing the implementation and continued service delivery of this pump station with not overburdening our residents who are served by it with an assessment that they can't manage. So I will certainly, as I debate and discuss with my colleagues on the board, will be looking to your department and to finance as well to give us some more than one option, hopefully, a couple of options for us to look at in order to achieve that balance, because clearly this is a critical need that needs to be addressed. I don't know how much of this can be paid for with the water and sewer funds, how much can be paid for with general fund. I understand that we cannot, there's some limitations there and what our options might be. Then we need to look at some other alternate funding sources, financing options and all of that. So I would just say that for myself, I'm going to remain mindful of what you've shared with us tonight, but also understanding that we can't, I think to overburden our residents with an assessment they can't manage could also be incredibly problematic. So I guess the real question, Kevin, is what is the plan to manage the rain events in the interim if we have a failure?
So right now we have Detroit Pump. We also want to thank, because they helped us with the assessments and pulling the pump and such. They're coming out tomorrow to actually look at the existing pump that's actually functioning, making sure everything's in order. It's a good time to do that because it's cold, not a lot of water, not a precipitation going in the ground. So we're going to have them review it, make sure it's still functioning and in tip-top shape as best it can be and functioning. On top of that, you know, we're working on the 2 diesel pumps. We're making sure, you know, they still run. One of them actually runs, so if we need to, it's just a manual. You got to come in and you got to sit there and babysit it because they can overheat real easy. So we have a man, the standby guy will come out, he'll sit there, watch it run. And any chance it overheats, he's got to turn it off, let it cool down, and then wait until it cools down enough to turn it back on again. So that's kind of where we're at with that pump. So we do have a spare, it's just a little more clunky. On top of that, I was going to reach out to Xylem, which is another pump manufacturer, and potentially look at creating a hard suctioned hose for emergency backup pump, potentially in case we need something like a 12-inch pump or something. So in case we have some sort of major failure, we have a pump backup. We do have pumps on hand. We only have a 6-inch pump, but that's not nearly enough. These things pump tens of thousands of gallons a minute, and a 6-inch pump only, you know, maybe 1,000. So But we have plans on hand to make sure that we don't have any emergencies.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Trustee Joseph?
Yeah, my first comment or question is along the lines of, excuse me, Clerk Berry, and I guess rather than replowing the field, when you come back next month, could we have some details about the contingency plan and what you've uncovered with regard to, catastrophe, and where would we go to have the 12-inch pumps, and then the balance of my questions have to do with the current situation that we're in. Two questions. I know we were talking about a short-term plan and it's sort of a more immediate need. One that maybe is an issue that we could address now is when the pumps are running, they're not really running very efficiently, and there is a lot of heat that's generated. This was kind of discussed and uncovered when the questions about the exorbitant water utilization, and that we're currently using water to cool the pumps when they're running at peak demand. And when we run that water to the tune of about $1,200 a month in one instance, is there a mechanism to have a device that, I don't know the terminology, but it captures that water, there's a cooling process, and it's recycled instead of using fresh water to cool during peak performance, and then that water is just drained, so there's a sewer and water bill attached when we're really just trying to cool the device during peak performance. Is that something we can look at? And then the last question, we had some dialogue when we were initially looking at this in terms of and I don't know if it changed over the years because of the water table and water levels, but we have instances where when the pump kicks on, it's draining into the drainage ditch. In essence, the pipe that takes the water away is underwater, and so the pump starts under load, which is another, as I understood one of the previous presentations, a tremendous stress, and it really dramatically impacts the longevity of the pump. When we are looking at the new configuration, can we take into consideration optimum drainage and eliminate the situation we find ourselves in where the pump kicks on under load, that the discharge pipe is actually submerged, causing a lot of back pressure? And I don't know as much as the guy at the end. It's his dad's name on the building, but I understand that. And can we talk about that in the short run as a means of trying to elongate the existing life that we have over there?
Yeah, so in terms of that, there's actually, I guess, somewhat of an air gap between that. So what happens is when the pump turns on, it brings the water up 20 feet to a different level. It spills out over the top of that column, and then it pours over a wall, and it's all gravity. So there's no, that surcharge pipe, it's not head pressure that's on this pump whatsoever. So that is a non-issue there. In terms of the coolant system or recirculating, I'll defer it to you.
I'm sure, and Carrie might have a little more understanding of this than I do, but I'm sure there's some water filtration devices that could potentially recycle non-potable water for that use. In practical terms at this station, since the water cooling goes down through the floor and circulated, I believe, into the wet well, that may be more cumbersome to install than it's worth.
That would be my initial inclination is, the water cost versus the capital to put something else in and then maintain it. We could look at that. You've got water there, but it still would need to be filtered. And do you have water there all the time? I suppose you probably do.
Yeah.
We could look into it. It's it's kind of a OM&R operation maintenance cost versus the capital cost. What would your payback be? We could look at that.
And I'm assuming that these are only, the high spikes in the water bills are really typically consistent with when we have a lot of water that needs to be pumped and they're running continuously. So I understand it just, on a surface glance, it seems like a tremendous waste. We're just using the water to cool, then we pay the sewage on the water, but in the grand configuration of solving the problem if we have to invest more capital into a, you know, a failing system. That doesn't make sense either, but I appreciate you looking into it.
With the pumps running more efficiently too, the way they're supposed to and optimally, they'll run less time, which will essentially also use less water.
And it's a significant amount too. It's not just a little more efficient. These newer pumps are a lot more efficient.
Kevin, it's true in our conversations, we have the ability to manage a catastrophic event,
Yes.
should that be necessary.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
And this is a monitored SCADA system pumps that you are monitoring 24/7. It is on the system. So
Yes.
should failures occur, you
We'll
guys
know
are on
about
it right away.
We get alarms on power failures, you name it, we get it. Yep. Yep.
No further comments from the board? Comments from the public? Any further comments from the public? Any comments from the public? Thank you, gentlemen. I'll bring it back up to the board.
Thank you for your time.
Mr. Supervisor, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the final report of the Demink Anchor Bay Pump Station Study.
Support.
I have a motion by Clerk Berry, supported by Trustee Joseph, to receive and file the report for the Demink Anchor Bay Pump Station. Clerk Berry.
Clerk Berry, aye. Trustee Joseph.
Aye.
Trustee Anderson.
Aye.
Trustee Demink. Aye. Treasurer Elliott.
Aye.
Supervisor Kersten.
Aye. Item 10, addendums if necessary. There are no addendums. We move to item 11, public comments. There is a 5-minute time limit on public comments. If you would please state your name and document it for the record when you speak.
Joe Kadich, live on Sutton. I've got a couple of things. Number one is on the closed session you're going into where the lawsuit's pending or ongoing over the fact that Supervisor Accavetti improperly or illegally signed a contract with the cell tower behind the fire station without having a open meeting to the public to get their thoughts on it. It's caused all the problem. You're still meeting on it. There's still, are you ever going to get to a situation where you're going to tell the public what it's about and how much it's cost them? I'd like to see that within the near future. The second thing is I noticed the land you bought, I guess, for the proposed area for the cell tower. Now they're starting to do some work in there, cutting the Phragmites. I understand when you bought that, that was the idea, but I also heard that being a marsh area, it wasn't ideal for a cell tower. Somebody like to comment on that, where that stands. The other thing I'd like to know about is, unfortunately she's not here, but Trustee Vosburg, a couple meetings ago, announced, being that she's the PFAS person for Chesterfield, going with SEMCOG, that we had no PFAS issues in Chesterfield because the water from Detroit Sewer and Water is pumped from Lake Huron. I think somebody should pass on to her, maybe the supervisor would, that the water that comes out to us is not only supplied from Lake Huron, but it also, there's 2 inlet stations in Detroit. It comes out of the Detroit River. Now, unfortunately, the PFAS area in this general area is Selfridge, that when it rains, the PFAS comes off the Selfridge field, gets drained out into Lake St. Clair, and it is not stationary. It goes downriver like everything else. So there's a possibility, regardless what Kathy Vosburg thinks, that we could be getting PFAS into the system. Not just us, but the whole metropolitan area. I think she should be aware of this if she's going to work on that committee and at least bring this out. And the other thing is that Detroit Sewer and Water does not test for PFAS. Nobody does. They can't do it. And the other thing is Eagle, that's been working, trying to work with Selfridge, trying to get them better filtration, has not been able to get anything from them because they don't want to spend the money, even though they're bringing $100 million airplanes into the system. They don't want to spend the money to rectify that whole situation. I think that should be brought out. I guess that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any further comments from the public?
John Speaka, 53978 Connor Drive. Ladies and gentlemen, what you guys seen on display tonight by the treasurer, that is the true Kathy Elliott on display tonight. So she goes out, she interviews candidates for the deputy treasurer position. Obviously, she must have found a candidate. And then she comes to the board to ask for an increase in compensation. So the current compensation is $3,000 for the deputy treasurer. She wants $72,000, which is a difference of $69,000 plus benefits for an individual that we had, Ellen, that was here for over 40 years, that not only was Ellen our investment coordinator, but she was our deputy treasurer, and she was doing that job for $3,000 a year. To hire two people to do what one person was doing makes no sense at all. Absolutely nonsensical. And as the treasurer, you would think that she would know that we have a projected deficit of $3.4 million. We can't keep adding to the deficit. But what's astonishing to me is she goes behind all your backs, decides to interview candidates. Obviously, she picks somebody, and then she comes to the board and with alligator tears, you know, I've got to hire somebody. We got to do this immediately. I need your vote and your support. If she really, truly respected each and every one of you, she would have came to you and discussed this prior to her going behind all your backs. It's not in the budget. The budget for '22 shows $3,000 for the deputy treasurer. Kathy, you can hire a deputy treasurer. Nobody on this board or in the audience is saying that you can't. You've got the authority to do that. But your authority stops at $3,000. And ask yourself, why did Ellen leave? Ellen left because you pushed her out. That's why she left. So you created this situation yourself. So the alligator tears don't do anything with me. Your behavior, Treasurer Elliott, is dangerous and reckless to Chesterfield. I'm glad that the board members were actually able to see who the real Kathy Elliott is. So for their own eyes. I mean, there's other people that have seen it in the audience, but you've displayed it for yourself. My opinion is we keep the current status of the deputy treasurer at the $3,000 we've got on the website. We're looking for an investment coordinator. So we go ahead and we hire the investment coordinator and we move forward with somebody in the township that can do the deputy treasurer's position. And then I guess my other question is, when you ran as a fiduciary and you were this super investor that made millions of dollars for people and you knew how to invest money and grow people's savings. Well, I guess my question to you is, why aren't you growing the township?
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to let you continue speaking, but again, stop the personal attacks. Every time you come to the mic, you do this. Please, speak to the point. Speak to the point. I'm not going to debate this with you. Speak to the issue. If you have an issue, address it. Stop the personal attacks, please.
Mr. Supervisor, when you make a point, it is not a personal attack. She ran a campaign on being the best of the best and being able to invest other people's money. This came from her own literature, from her own self. Now that the township, I haven't seen any sort of she should be able to invest the township's money. We shouldn't even need an investment coordinator, is my point.
Thank you, sir. Further comments from the public?
Adam Beschuk, 47468 Bayside Circle West. Just a couple thoughts I had throughout the meeting. One regarding the deputy treasurer situation. I'm glad to see that was postponed. I think it makes sense just to think about it a little bit more clearly. And just something I was thinking during the course of that discussion was, you know, we're here in a new year. We just passed a new budget for the new year. The previous deputy treasurer announced her retirement. It's in my mind, I'm thinking, was this a known situation when the budget was being proposed? And if so, why was one position created if two were desired? So maybe you could answer that if there's an answer for it. And then the other is regarding the BSNA software purchase. Seems to be somewhat of a common theme in a lot of these meetings, and I'm all for efficiencies and spending money to help the township save money in the long run. One thing I would hope that down the road we will see some sort of reporting, you know, return on investment sort of you know, information reported back to the public just to show, hey, these investments in the technology are paying off and here's how. I think that'd be good for us to see. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Further comments?
Mike Orton, 50393 Bauer. I would like to say, you know, Happy New Year. Glad to see everybody's back and doing well this year. Hopefully this one will be a lot better than the last few. One of the things I wanted to take note of is, you know, several things that were mentioned tonight, and I also want to extend congratulations to the new people at the Public Safety Department, the new officer and the new Public Safety Director. I hope them well in their new careers here. And I wanted to talk about public safety in that regard. There was a speech given 61 years ago this week, and I'd like to give a little excerpt of it because I actually have a specialized copy of it via teleprompt paper. I had bought this when I went to a museum in Kansas, and you'll know when I recite some of it. But this was given 61 years ago this week. A vital element in keeping peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known by any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But now we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. I cite this because this is actually the farewell address of President Eisenhower. The reason I gave that excerpt, though, is that I have come in my time in public service, both in military and in serving the township, that I've realized the importance of moving beyond certain traditions and accepting the reality of the world. Much as the world changed after World War II in the necessary involvement regarding military affairs as well as that of the defense industry, we have to look at the way public safety has changed over the course of American history. The foundations of something like firefighting were based in the original founding, with the first firefighter basically being Benjamin Franklin when he set up the Philadelphia Fire Company. It is a part of American history. And in the past, in that not so distant past, part of the responsibilities of many people, especially in small towns, rural communities, was that it was the stoic man, the citizen, who had to basically serve out time in their community when they had the ability to in the volunteer fire service, or to be deputized by the sheriff, or in any regard like that. But in today's society, unfortunately, we can no longer risk emergency improvisation like that. Today, fires burn 8 times hotter and faster than they did 50 years ago. This is a very unfortunate and uncomfortable notion of our modern society. And thus, we must entrust within certain individuals to have full-time capabilities to meet those regards. Just as Eisenhower warned in the past that we could no longer risk a time period of switching over to a wartime economy and drafting millions of men away from their services, we had to have watchers on the wall ready at the notice to perform the duties expected of them in our society. And I'm going to take many meetings to discuss this sort of thing, but one of the things this is trying to get at is a push for consideration of expanding the full-time capabilities of the fire department within this township. It is necessary and desired for the future if we are to maintain growth, if we are to maintain prosperity, if we are to maintain a level of security moving forward in our society. Thank you, and I hope to continue this over the next few meetings. Take care.
Thank you, sir. Further comments from the public? No further comments from the public. I'll bring it back up to the board. Trustee Anderson.
Thank you. I'll keep it short. Personally, I'd like to congratulate Danielle Feld on her appointment to the Chesterfield Township Police Department. She's the 3rd generation of her family to enter the profession of law enforcement. And Danielle, at your convenience, talk to your dad, Joe, and your grandfather, Bob. Maybe find out what it was like when they came on the job during their first few days on it, or months. Be an interesting comparison. Secondly and finally, I'd like to thank Ellen Clerk for 44 years serving the township. My opinion is that her absence and expertise will be obvious responding to the fiscal landscape of our township. And I hope she has a long and prosperous retirement. First time of the year. I wish everyone a happy new year. Thank you.
Trustee Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. I'd like to pick up where Trustee Anderson left off and congratulate the 2 new additions to our public safety team. I think I really appreciated Captain Frank's comment about a legacy, and I'm already aware, just by Trustee Anderson's comments, that there's a very good story associated with her grandfather's first few days on the force. I've come to know Hank pretty well, and I'm curious to hear what that situation was, and I bet it's a good one. Also like to congratulate and thank Ms. Clark for her tremendous dedication to the township and her really unprecedented 44 years of service. It's just remarkable. Mr. Wharton talked about changes in our society, and I think we can all agree it's very uncommon to see somebody spend 44 years in a place that they love, committed to their community the way Ms. Clark has, and I wish her, as Hank did, better than I am, a great retirement and a well-deserved retirement. Just wanted to, as I try to do, address some of the concerns or comments from the speakers. Mr. Kadich's I think his questions are valid in terms of, when are we going to update the citizenry, and that time is upon us. We've had some closed session discussions about the litigation, and we're going to be briefed again tonight by some very competent counsel on what our options are. The purchase of the land for an alternative site for a cell tower is still a viable plan for what we anticipate to be growth in the township. And when we made that purchase, we recognized that there was an opportunity that could help us in the present problem with the tower, but also creates opportunities for down the road. And so the purchase was made with both of those considerations. And I'm not trying to be cute or coy, but I think it's appropriate to hear what we have tonight in closed session before I give you my feedback on what and how decisions were made. I did appreciate the comments about PFAS and your concerns about state regulators or state investigatory powers through EGLE or formerly DNR and their relationship with Selfridge. And I echo some of your concerns, and I attempted to address a couple of them in the sustainability study opportunity in the brief report I gave. But not only are you accurate in terms of some of the concerns about groundwater and where the PFAS goes, and it never dies. We know that. It's always with us. And the other concern is any improvements, changes, structural, or I guess anytime you disturb the soil in whatever project you're working on, it sort of brings about the potential for more PFAS exposure and leaching into groundwater. That is a fact, and what I've asked, and I think we're close, is for the county to use their, I don't want to say authority, but their influence and their relationships with the decision and policymakers inside the gate at Selfridge to come to our community and hear the concerns that you've raised and many others have raised at the podium, instead of us carrying back messages from what we gather. You can ask directly to the powers that be, if you will, and that's been something I've strongly advocated for, and I believe that is coming. I'm going to leave the bulk of the next presenter's comments to Treasurer Elliott if she chooses to address them, but a couple of areas where I felt myself sort of echoing the sentiment that the supervisor had when he asked for a more or a less, attacking type tone. But I can tell you, as I listened to your concerns and your criticism, there was a path that I was sort of following and nodding along with, in the sense that there are certainly statutory obligations to have a deputy. Clearly there are. But the conversation was reduced to reflect that emergency appointment must take place, and that it must take place under the combining of, these new FTE, and we're going to attach that to somebody that's not employed with the township now. And the reality is, if we were mitigating the spirit of the statute that requires a deputy, you could have had that answered. We could have had that answered just with a simple conversation about, look, I'm up against the wall in terms of a 44-year employee leaving. I don't have a deputy. What could I do in the interim while I have other ideas about how to make my department better? And it could have been as simple as temporarily deputizing another like-positioned, in terms of responsibility, employee. Could have gone to the finance department. Could have gone to, I don't know. There's a million opportunities to go to fix a statutory or constitutional crisis. But that's not what happened. That small statutory element was used as the catalyst for why we needed to turn all of our history on its head and adopt this new plan. And that's a disingenuous argument, and it didn't fool anybody, because two commenters came to the podium tonight and said, I'm glad that it was postponed because it's not fully cured. It needs a little more work, and it needs the stakeholders at the table in an earnest way. We have a very seasoned HR director. We have elected officials that have been on this board for some time that have experienced very like position problems, and there are remedies that are available that don't disingenuously fall under the guise of I must, and I'm the only one who's acting, and then take offense to the suggestion that's being mocked. There is no impending doom without a deputy treasurer. That problem is easily remediated, and there are countless examples of Clerk Berry diplomatically tried to infuse a few, but they were rejected. And you could temporarily appoint somebody to sign a check. The deputy's powers are at the pleasure of the elected official. So a short-term crisis Marshall Plan that allows a check to be signed is a fair, process. But I brought this forward, because we didn't know that she said she would retire at some point, but you can't fool people who are paying attention. We had a resident that's been coming to meetings, and he listens, and I enjoy his feedback every time he goes to the podium, and he conveniently reminds people that problem, according to your timeline, was apparent during budget time. Never came up. Because the process was never, in my opinion, the process never involved team. It didn't involve team. And I'm going to go in an optimistic way and assume that it didn't go team because the interpretation of the urgency dictated the path that the individual followed. But I understand why some people call that back room and shady and behind backs. I understand it perfectly because it felt very much like a non-transparent exercise. And then when I investigated further, and I'm going to ask some of my more seasoned board members, I know that Trustee Domink has great relationships with employees in this township. Investigate this process for yourself, because I have, and I don't have nearly the connectivity that you have, the relationships that you've built with some of the employees here. And I don't even have a lot of emotion, and I was getting emotional listening to some of the challenges that our employees are facing under the treasurer's leadership. It has to stop. It really has to stop. And the difficulties that are created in HR, Steve Duchesne's a pro, he's been around forever. But he can't go on permanent mop-up duty. There's too many things that require his attention and too many things that require his undivided attention. And to keep dealing with a problem that is exacerbated by petulance is not a fair allocation of resources. And that's something that is keeps coming up every time I talk to people here that work here full-time. The Veruca Salt method of negotiation is not appropriate. Utilizing temper tantrums and storming out of meetings and I want it now and I want it this way is not going to work. And any board member that votes to approve that kind of nonsense perpetuates the problem. And I had a very candid conversation with Clerk Berry. And I appreciate and respect your position, which is I try to stay in my lane. My responsibility is the clerk's office. And while that's true, there's also responsibility to the 1/7 responsibility to the township as a whole. And when you clearly see a broken process coming forward, you can't simply allow it to go forward because you don't want to deal with the petulance. And that's not, and it leads to, Supervisor Kersten, it leads to people coming to the podium and putting an ugly spin on that because it looks ugly. And so when they get frustrated and they say, this has all the markings of behind the scenes, secretive, and all, I think it's sincere. I think it's a legitimate takeaway. We just can't do and operate like this. There's an opportunity to put a process in place with a lot of talented people who are all, pulling in the same direction to better our community, but you can't infuse Veruca Salt techniques on the negotiation. I understand you want it now, but there's a process. Fix the process, but it's a timeliness issue, and take some time and do it right, and be on pace with the other departments. That's a fair and reasonable place to be. Two of our speakers picked up on that, and the second half of the question regarding B&A and how does it enhance is another great question. So technology is great, but show me how it benefits and enhances the quality of life in the township. What I'm hoping and why I supported BS&A software is the element that allows the tracking of the expenditure of resources, particularly our most valued resources, which is our human resource. So when an employee who's funded out of the enterprise fund or your water bill works on anything that isn't associated with your water bill, that has to be paid for by another department, namely the general fund. And the commingling of enterprise fund employees working on other projects has been a constant source of monitoring and assessing. And the BS&A software will allow us to see any project that happens, who worked on it, from what department, and is it an appropriate use of the enterprise fund. And it'll be hard, but I know just from coming to know you and listening to you question at the podium, you'll pick up on it, because it is the single biggest factor in determining the appropriate water and sewer rate that you're billed. And until you have an efficient enterprise fund funded employees that are strictly that and no commingling of any other employees, you won't really know what the absolute and true cost of your water and sewer services are. BS&A will help us, and it'll prevent an erroneous increase in your water bill based on, well, we came up short because the fund is low. Well, the fund won't be low if we're tracking it and we know exactly who's working on what. So stay tuned, but I'm very, very enthusiastic about the change in culture that the supervisor talked about. BS&A is a change in culture, and it helps what we have in the township, talented people, be very organized and see exactly where resources are being allocated. The last speaker, I appreciate always when Mr. Wharton comes to the podium, and I'm grateful that he has now sort of foreshadowed a theme that he's worried about and concerned about, and his comments were well made, and I do appreciate the fact that he's going to come back with more, and I respect his full-time concept. I would only infuse that there are also other methods for ensuring the safety and continued safety, and as you put it, somebody on the wall to make sure that we're ready to go. And I think tonight the addition to the team of Captain Franks, Captain McNair, and Chief Miller in the form of Public Safety Director Bassett will ensure that your concerns are constantly monitored, because your safety, the resident safety, is the paramount #1 focus of those men. And the entire department is focused on keeping residents safe, and I guarantee that they will come to a great conclusion with how to do that. And so I'm confident there, and I look forward to whatever you infuse in the discussion. Lastly, I'd like to close with a happy birthday wish to one of my favorite people in the township. Mrs. Anderson is 29 again, and so is her twin, so happy birthday to my buddy, Mrs. Anderson, and I'm sorry, well, actually, you're welcome for keeping Hank here tonight so that you could celebrate well, with a board meeting, and I'm sure that she's home watching, and happy birthday to her. Thank you.
Trustee Domingue.
Congratulations to Officer Feld. I wish you the best and be safe in your new career. To our new Public Safety Director, Brian Bassett, welcome to Chesterfield. If you need anything, give me a call. I'm sure you'll be a great asset and working with Brad and everything else. And there was one other thing what I wanted to say. Oh, we'll get out of here so we can get Mr. Land out of here because I notice he's falling asleep back there. I'm done.
Treasurer Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor. Clarify a few things that were talked about. The candidates were interviewed. The listing and interviews were put forth by our HR department with full knowledge of the supervisor. I have met extensively with both the HR director and the supervisor and followed the direction and advice given by the HR director on the process going forward. There is no way to make an offer to the candidates, and the reason why we went forward and put a listing out there was to find out, is there anybody who is even close to Ellen? That's the question. Ellen has come with 44 years in a very unique position. So bringing this agenda item forward tonight was actually to say to the board, the structure that you have is specific to a person, and it was a question of saying to the board, do you want to change the structure? And I think this postponement will further that discussion. I think with the holidays and things, there was some people were away, and there was also a bout of COVID that put some people in situations where they weren't here, and we had some various staffing issues. So I don't think that some of the timing and the way that this is being laid out is very fair. I did make a phone call today when I found out that there was some misunderstandings, and trying to have that conversation with Trustee Joseph. Today, we did talk just before the meeting tonight and tried to clear some of that out, but only had a minute. The deputy announced her retirement within, I believe it was either 2 or 3 days before the final budget meeting, and there just was not enough time to allow for discussion with the supervisor and HR director what the next steps would be and whether or not that there would be any changes to the budget. And so we had discussed that we would bring this to the board in January, and that's why that wasn't brought up at the time. Any questions about statutory investments, those are available at the MTA website. You are limited on what you can invest in. So you have to be very careful. It's primarily mostly very safe things like CDs, so it isn't investing in the stock market. There was no proposal that was an increase to the budget that I had put together. It was one of a different structure which would allocate and possibly likely decrease the budget for this year. I'm not entirely sure what references to temper tantrums are, and I don't know that that's necessary to address any further. And I want to thank you, Mr. Supervisor, and wish everybody a good night.
Thank you. I'll try and make this quick, just some comments from myself. Oh, Clerk Berry, I am sorry. Again, Clerk Berry, please.
I just had to give you a hard time, Mr. Supervisor. Appreciate it. I'll make it really quick, less than 60 seconds. Just wanted the opportunity to welcome our new officer as well as our new public safety director. I had the opportunity tonight, as all of you saw, to administer the oath of office, and just wanted to make a statement that that is far and away one of the greatest privileges I have as being our clerk, is to be able to administer that oath of office. Every single time I do it, I just have to, be awed by the fact that I'm given the honor and privilege of doing it, as well as what that means, because it means more than words to me, and I think it means more than words to those who take the oath when they place, their hand up in mirror to mine. So it reminds all of us that we do serve the Constitution of the United States. We serve in and for the residents of the Township of Chesterfield. So I think it's a great reminder, and it's one of the greatest privileges that I have. So just wanted to make that statement and welcome all those folks here to the township. Secondly, there's been a lot of discussion about the structure of our deputies here and how that helps to facilitate the administration of our statutory duties, as well as the efficiencies of the departments and service delivery. Deputies are a critically important part of the infrastructure here in terms of service delivery and making sure quality assurances and so forth, and that the essential functions occur here. And I have full confidence in our ability to resolve the issue and bring about an equitable resolution. None of the deputies at this point, I believe, are structured ideally. However, I do believe that we will be able to come up with a resolution, and I think it's going to be one that is going to satisfy not only all the board members, but that is going to fully utilize our abilities to deliver services to our residents, again, at the highest quality of service, the lowest possible cost. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, just, I'll keep it quick, too. As Trustee Joseph had said, yes, there is a culture change going on here, and we are in a state of transition. It started in July when I took over as supervisor, was appointed supervisor, and there were other senior employees that left based on retirement by their own choosing. Ellen Clark being the latest, a well-deserved retirement by her own choosing. Ellen deserves recognition. She doesn't need the nonsense that was attached to her discussion tonight, and I feel bad that that occurred. Ellen was a dedicated employee for 44 years here and was a wealth of knowledge. And unfortunately, this township has always operated with one person in that position that assumed many roles. And I'm going back to when this was an 11,000 populated township where they worked out of the school, which is no longer there. Ellen was there. Ellen swore me in as a police officer when I started in 1989. And her skill and experience will never be replaced here. Never. No matter who we bring in. The transition that's going on here now is a trend towards professional, skilled expertise in certain areas. We have to achieve that. We have to. That is an emphasis of this culture change in a professional organization that has to occur. No one person in this organization is so important that it's going to collapse or fall apart the next day. That's not a good group. That's not the way you manage. We manage emergencies, we manage employee retirement, and we put the best possible candidates forward at all times. Mr. Speaker, your math is wrong and incorrect again, and I appreciate your comments. I truly do. You come to the board, you come to the podium, you bring comments that are factual, I'll listen to them. But when you go on attacks, when you drag politics into it again, I'm not here for that. And I can't tolerate it because it's not the benefit of this township. We're all here to serve. And as you coming to the podium, or any resident coming to the podium, you're here to serve and you're here to voice an opinion, not a personal attack. And I will continue to call that out if that occurs. You have a right to speak, you have a right to voice your opinion, and I acknowledge that. But please stop the personal attacks, unnecessary. We're not in a deficit. We spent a lot of time talking about deputies. We had a presentation on the real problem, a real problem in this township, one of them. A Jefferson pump station, $4 million fix, estimated. That should consume a large portion of what this board discusses in the coming months. And I'll say in my previous comments, this does open up the door for some ARPA funds that we may be able to apply to offset the cost of this very important location. It serves over 650 residents. There are nights now in a heavy event that I think of, what if it fails? What are we going to do? And Director Johnson has been in my office, making contingency plans, making sure that we're able to respond in a catastrophic event should that fail. That's just one of them. That's just one of the daily occurrences that goes on here. The comments about PFAS, there will be a presentation specifically by Selfridge Base in the coming month to address exactly the comments that the residents had brought up here, and that the trustees questioned, again tonight, asked about what the status of. The experts, I've been told, have offered to come and give a presentation, both from Selfridge and their contingent, that address the PFAS in the waterways. Last thing I want to point out, again, everybody's done it. Very proud that Chief Bassett is now part of the organization here. Very proud that Sergeant Joe Feld got to pin the badge on his daughter. That's meaningful. The sad thing is, we have an officer that's fighting for his life, unfortunately. A young guy. I swore him in, one of my first hires as a police chief. I think about him daily too. With that being said, I would hope that this board would offer prayers to Officer Kyle LeBeau and hope for recovery. Those are the real priorities, and he's an employee here. Again, I'll close with congratulations, Ellen Clark. I wish her the best, and she's been a great employee for this township. Thank you. A motion to go into closed session.
Item
13, closed session.
Item 13A is closed session to discuss with legal counsel pending litigation in the matter of PI Tower Development LLC versus Chesterfield Township, Charter Township of Chesterfield, United States District Court, Eastern District of Michigan, Southern Division, case number 420CV 12280 MFL RSW pursuant to MCL 15.268E.
Do you have a motion to go into closed session?
Motion to go in closed session.
Trustee Domingue,
Second.
supported by Clerk Berry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Do I have a motion to return to open session?
So moved.
Support.
Barry, support by trustee Demink.
Take a vote.
Clerk Barry, we call the roll?
Clerk Barry, aye. Trustee Demink.
Aye.
Trustee Anderson.
Aye.
Trustee Joseph.
Aye.
Treasurer Elliott.
Aye.
Supervisor Kersten.
Aye. 10:30 on the nose. Do we got a motion to go into extra innings?
You're good.
Mr. Supervisor, action item coming out of our closed session discussion, I'd like to offer a motion to allow our attorneys to continue settlement negotiations with PI Tower.
Have a motion by trustee Joseph to allow our attorneys to continue negotiations toward the settlement of PI Tower. Support?
As discussed in closed session.
As discussed in closed session. Is there support for that motion?
Second.
Motion by trustee Joseph, supported by clerk Barry. Clerk Barry, call roll.
Trustee Joseph.
Aye.
Clerk Barry, aye. Trustee Anderson.
Aye.
Trustee Demink.
Aye.
Treasurer Elliott.
Aye.
Supervisor Kersten.
Aye. Item 14, adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to
Support.
adjourn, support. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned at